Chapter 702. Master, Fire Chalene came over half-hidden and said, "Something's wrong." They had only been out for a day, but the aura of resentment in the palace seemed to have been cleared away by something. Something was not right. Beligaju lowered his eyes and turned the thumb ring on his finger twice. He ordered in a calm voice, "Go and check it out." "Yes." Fire Chalene immediately disappeared, leaving only Azure Dragon to accompany Beligaju on his left. At this moment, the Xuanwu gate that led to the palace opened. Countless officials knelt on the white stone stairs. Their wide sleeves were stuck to the ground, and their voices were loud and clear. "Welcome the retired emperor and the royal family." The retired emperor smiled gracefully and raised his long sleeves. "My beloved officials, please rise." The officials stood up one by one. They stood in a long row and looked very grand. The retired emperor's return meant that the crown prince was going to be chosen. This was the most important thing for the entire War Dragon dynasty. Everyone had a smile on their faces. Although many problems had not been solved, all the neighboring countries on the Divine Land knew how powerful the War Dragon dynasty was. The third Princess Consort had defeated the ambassadors from the neighboring countries all by herself. The royal family even took the opportunity to send troops to the south. Now, when they saw the flag of the War Dragon dynasty, their hearts trembled. This was something that had never happened before. The War Dragon dynasty was much more powerful than before. As subjects, they all felt proud and elated from the inside out. In fact, when the retired emperor was still in power, the War Dragon dynasty had always been doing well. However, it was later ruined by the emperor too much, which caused it to go downhill for 20 years. In addition, there were internal problems in the Elder Council. Their greed for eternal life made them lose their rationality, which led to the later stage of corruption. Now that the emperor was gone, it was not necessarily a bad thing for the War Dragon dynasty. However, it was not necessarily a good thing for the four great families who had great control over power. Originally, the four great families and the Elder Council relied on each other. The four great families were called the four great families not only because of the military power and land they controlled, but also because they had many branches. Each of them was a founding general. Some of them had helped the retired emperor a lot. At this point, it was only natural that he would overthink things. They followed behind the retired emperor with smiles on their faces, thinking about how they would talk about the imperial consort selection in a while. They had the same idea before. However, at that time, Hellion Vivian was too outstanding. Whether it was in terms of appearance or martial chi, she took the first place. They had no way of sending anyone to the royal family. Things were different now. There had been no news from Hellion Vivian's stomach for a long time. A new emperor was different from a crown prince. Once he succeeded the throne, he would have to spread his family and live a fair life. This time, it was easier than ever to send someone into the palace. After all, there was no need for him to be ranked first. As long as he had someone draw a portrait and send it to the retired emperor for him to take a look, he would be able to select at least 2 young ladies from influential families. The Hay family was not participating, and Hellion Vivian was in charge of the Hellion family. Before the other 2 families returned to the capital, they had ordered their families to draw their portraits. Now, they were even more determined to win. Hellion Vivian was also from one of the 4 influential families. It was impossible for her not to know about the affairs of the other families. The moment the retired emperor entered the capital, a mercenary passed the news to Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian looked at the portraits in her hands. She raised her long and narrow eyes lazily. "Are these the beauties chosen for the royal family?" The mercenary felt that it was best for him to remain silent at this time. Hellion Vivian smiled. "There are all kinds of beauties. Go ahead and return the scrolls. I reckon that someone will need them for the luncheon." The mercenary looked down and said in a low voice, "Miss, these portraits are. Return them." Hellion Vivian was still smiling as she played with the strawberry in her palm. "I want to hear what these ministers will say in the palace." The mercenary replied, "Yes." In a flash, he disappeared from the Jochong Hall. After he left, Hellion Vivian felt a surge of excitement in her blood. She only knew what was going on when she touched her belly. Fetal movement. Wasn't it too fast? Didn't she need to be pregnant for a long time to have fetal movement? Why was her baby so fast? Helene Vivian was thinking about it when she felt a movement in her palm. The baby seemed to be very active, as if he was happy. She was going to prank him. But he was very happy. His personality was too different from others. Little naughty boy. Helene Vivian smiled faintly as she touched her belly. The little one in her belly moved again, as if he was responding to Helene Vivian's words. It seemed that he really liked to prank people. Helene Vivian couldn't help but think of a future where the little one would run around the palace to prank people. When he saw people trembling in fear, he would laugh mischievously. Although it wasn't very moral to do that to others, Helene Vivian still felt that her baby was very cute when he was naughty. What made her sad was His Highness' way of teaching. She didn't know if he would directly throw the baby out when the time came. As if he knew what Helene Vivian was thinking, her belly moved again. Helene Vivian smiled again and put down the strawberry in her hand lazily. Okay, let's go and see your father now. They should have already entered the side hall by now. After saying that, Helene Vivian walked out of the inner room. The palace maids were already waiting outside. Some were holding a heater, and some were holding a cloak. Before His Highness left, he had instructed that the Princess Consort must bring everything with her. Little Seven was still chewing on a meat bun at the side. He was dressed to the nines today. He was dressed in a black and shiny equestrian uniform, with jade inlaid on the cuffs. His handsome little face was handsome and full of vigor. As Helene Wei reached out to hold his hand, he looked even more attractive. The hundreds of officials had to bow for a period of time. The people in the harem were all in the main hall waiting for the Emperor Emeritus and his entourage to come over from Xuanwu Gate. Bailey Jiaoju was standing at retired Emperor's left side. He didn't have the slightest bit of travel-worn feeling. On the contrary, he was refined like jade. He didn't easily raise his eyes, yet he was able to create a noble and threatening aura. Helene Vivian didn't expect to catch His Highness's gaze the moment she arrived. She smiled at him. Xiao Qi also puffed up his cheeks and called out, "Third brother, Imperial Grandfather." Beligaju faintly grunted. He ignored the surrounding officials and held Helene Vivian's hand as if there was no one around. His handsome brows furrowed. "Why are your hands so cold?" "Cold?" Helene Vivian didn't feel it. Instead, she reached out and pulled on His Highness's sleeve. Her voice carried a smile. "I have something to tell you." Chapter 703. Wait a moment. Beligaju's voice was unhurried as he instructed An Ying, who was behind him, "Go and get a hand warmer." An Ying nodded respectfully. He left quickly and returned quickly. Helene Vivian's left hand was stuffed with something warm while her right hand was held by Beligaju. It was indeed very warm. It was just that the surrounding gazes were too obvious. It was as if everyone was looking at them. Beligaju's side profile did not reveal any expression, but his thin lips faintly curved. He was even more handsome than when he entered. Eunuch's son, who was standing at the side, finally heaved a sigh of relief. Others did not know, but he was very clear in his heart. His Highness had been very indifferent along the way. Furthermore, with the recent events, the Emperor had been very worried. He and the retired Emperor were really worried that His Highness would cultivate the devil's path. Now, it seemed that the royal family was still the same as before. It was just that they were indifferent and did not want to talk to them. They were still quite gentle when they saw the third princess consort. The retired Emperor also understood his grandson's intention. He secretly scolded this brat. Then, he waved his hand and called little Seven over to sit at the seat of honor together. Looking up, there was a small wooden table in front of every official. Plates were already placed on each table. The palace maids and eunuchs standing at the side poured wine and served the banquet. It was extremely lively. However, the livelier it was, the more lively some people's thoughts were. Beligaju had just sat down with Helene Vivian in his arms. His slender and fair fingers peeled a roasted chestnut and placed the meat into Helene Vivian's bowl. He then wiped his hands with a white handkerchief. At this moment, he saw the two officials at the front of the hall stand up. They were the family heads who had followed the retired emperor to pray for blessings. Every one of them had a joyous expression on their faces. Although this old servant wasn't in the capital, this old servant still admires your highness' valiance. You took the Shenyuan kingdom's capital effortlessly. In less than a day, their king wrote a letter begging for mercy to the retired emperor. In front of the emissary, he even gave up the territory south of Shenyuan kingdom. This has never happened before. Your highness's strategy is truly unique. That's right. Old Li and I were stunned when we heard that. As the saying goes, heroes come from the young. Just look at the royal family. In the future, our war dragon dynasty's status in the divine continent will be different. As the saying goes, a country can't go a day without an emperor. Now that the previous emperor is no longer around, Old Wu and I are both 3 generations of senior officials. In front of all the officials, we want to recommend the 3rd prince to the retired emperor as the next emperor. With such a talented and virtuous prince, I don't think anyone will object to handing over the war dragon dynasty to him. Of course, no one would object to this after experiencing a series of events. Even the people on the 5th prince's side were dead set on Beligaju, let alone those officials who were originally on Beligaju's side. Moreover, Beligaju was originally the crown prince. Now that the emperor was no longer around, it was both in accordance with the rules and the will of the heavens to let him succeed the throne. All the officials stood up one by one and knelt in the main hall. All of them were recommending the 3rd prince. When the retired emperor heard this, he was very happy. He didn't have many days left. The icy brat's succession was undoubtedly fulfilling his last wish. Before returning to the palace, a few of the officials had vaguely mentioned this matter. However, he originally thought that he would have to wait a few days. He didn't expect that they would say it today. My beloved officials, please rise. The Emperor Emeritus laughed heartily, but he also had doubts in his heart. However, the joy made him dispel those doubts. He turned his head and said to Eunuch's son, "The ascension of the emperor has always been a fundamental matter of the country. You and Li Daren carefully choose whether there are any auspicious days recently." "Yes." Eunuch's son bowed his head and responded, full of joy and harmony. When the officials heard this, they knew that the matter was not going to run away. They laughed even more heartily. Except for the officials of the 2 families, everyone sat back to their original seats and raised their wine glasses. You toast me, I toast you. Especially those officials who had followed Beligaju since early on. They were different from the aides of the other princes. They clearly knew that he was a wise emperor. He had a calm mind and kept a low profile. He was different from the other princes who only knew how to pursue personal interests. However, for so many years, even if they had loyalty, they had to weigh it and couldn't show it too obviously in the main hall. They were worried that the emperor would be jealous and not give his highness any chance. From childhood to adulthood, both the emperor and the empress treated the royal family very unfairly. Although as officials, they shouldn't talk about the royal family. But the emperor's practice was too obvious. If it weren't for the retired emperor's protection, it was uncertain whether the royal family could grow up. Since the day the royal family was tested first in martial qi, the emperor's jealousy would always be hidden in his daily actions. In any family, to be able to get such an honor would only be praised. But it was different in the royal family. Although the War Dragon dynasty advocated martial arts, the 3rd prince also got the first position of the crown prince. But in the palace, the heavens had always been jealous of heroes. In the year of the fire, they were almost desperate. Watching a wise emperor about to fall like this, they felt regret in their hearts. They didn't expect that the royal family, who was gradually growing up, not only did not weaken his sense of existence. Instead, he became the most mysterious prince of the War Dragon dynasty. Unknowingly, the 6 tribes were gradually controlled by him. Even the generals and kings of other neighboring countries had to be afraid of the existence of such a prince. Now that the clouds had finally parted and the sun had risen, His Highness was finally going to ascend the throne. How could they not be happy? However, the 2 officials didn't have such thoughts. The reason why they wanted to promote Beligaju to succeed the throne so quickly was purely to let their daughters marry into the palace, so that they could protect their family's power. Because the current situation was very obvious. Even if they didn't promote the third prince to be the emperor, he would inherit the throne soon. It was better for them to bring it up first, and then let the third prince owe them a favor. Then, it would be much easier to talk about the concubine selection. The two officials had a good plan. They looked at each other, and one of them opened his mouth again. The palace has not been very peaceful recently. I feel that there should be something to be happy about to drive away the bad luck. That's the reason. The other official looked in the direction of Hellion Vivian as he said, according to what I have built, the palace is too lacking in liveliness. Princess Consort and His Highness have been married for a while. His Highness is usually busy. It's time to find a few close people to share His Highness's worries. Hellion Vivian was still eating the chestnuts Beligaju peeled for her. Naturally, she didn't find a suitable opportunity to tell His Highness about her pregnancy. These people were more anxious than the other. They were really stupid. Chapter 704. The two ministers echoed each other. The meaning of their words could not be more obvious. It was nothing more than hinting that Hellion Wei had no news in her stomach. The rest of the people were stunned. During this period of time, many of the officials had become Hellion Vivian's admirers. With the Minister of Appointments as the leader, they would send people into the palace from time to ask Hellion Vivian to give them some tips on solving cases. Now that they heard someone directly pointing the finger at Hellion Vivian without saying anything, they became anxious. After all, since ancient times, the heir of the imperial family was a very important matter. Official Li saw that the commotion around him had died down, so he deliberately smiled and asked Hellion Vivian, Princess Consort, what do you think? If she directly asked Third Prince about this matter, he would definitely refuse. Asking in a roundabout way like this, Wei couldn't very well refuse in front of all the ministers. That would only appear to be stingy, which would give her even more of an excuse to have more concubines. Hellion Vivian looked at him and was about to speak. But she was stopped by a wooden chopstick that flew through the air. The martial chi from the wooden chopsticks pierced through the official hat on Lord Li's head, and the force of impact forced Lord Li to take 2 steps back. As if shocked by this sudden attack, Official Li didn't manage to retract his smile before his lips turned pale. He reached out to touch his long hair, and only then did he realize how close he was to death. If it wasn't for the official hat on his head, the chopstick would have pierced through his head. After Official Li reacted, he was so scared that his whole body started to tremble. Everyone turned to look at Bailey Jiaoju, who had made a move. However, he only smiled faintly and played with the other chopsticks in his hand. Lord Li, don't you know that I have sent troops to attack the Shenyuan Kingdom's capital? Then do you know why I did this? As he spoke, he held up the other chopstick. His movements were very elegant, but his eyes were filled with viciousness. There was a swoosh sound. Official Li's left leg was pierced through just like that. Ah! A painful cry resounded throughout the entire palace. Mr. Li could no longer speak. His entire body was lying on the floor of the hall. He reached out and hugged his aching left leg, rolling back and forth. Bright red blood flowed out from Mr. Li's knee, scaring the other person standing beside him. His face also paled, and he swallowed his saliva with difficulty. Beligaju just took a white handkerchief from the side and wiped his hands before continuing to speak to the two of them, because they insist on forcing this highness to take in a concubine. Why, Your Highness? These old officials are only thinking for the sake of the War Dragon dynasty. The minister tried his best to explain. He looked at the retired emperor again and vaguely said with confidence, moreover, it's fine if Your Highness doesn't agree. Why do you have to hurt people? No matter what, we are old ministers who have followed the retired emperor conscientiously. Your Highness treats me and old Li like this. Have you ever thought that others will be bitterly disappointed? When the retired emperor heard the last sentence, his brows furrowed even tighter. That minister seized the opportunity and continued, if it wasn't for the third Princess Consort's pregnancy, old Li and I wouldn't have participated in the concubine selection. It's just that there's really no one in the palace. Is it wrong for us to care about Your Highness? Care about this highness? Beligaju sneered, a mocking expression on his face. When that minister heard this, he no longer cried injustice to Beligaju. Instead, he turned to the retired emperor and said, Retired emperor, You have to save us old officials are. With His Highness's temperament, he kills people as he pleases. If we old officials knew this, we might as well go home and farm." As he spoke, he sighed. "It's really a femme fatale, a femme fatale are." The words femme fatale were nothing more than an allusion to Helene Vivian. He wanted to push all the blame to Helene Vivian. This was because the ministers were very clear that it was impossible for the retired emperor to punish the third prince. However, Helene Wei was different. She had been married for a long time and was not pregnant. In ancient times, it could be considered a crime. In addition, Bailey Jiaoju had no intention of marrying a consort, which made this crime even more serious. The more the royal opposed, the more the people and colleagues would talk about it. They would say that he did it for Helene Vivian. The minister believed that the retired emperor also understood this point. The most taboo for a ruler was to favor only one person. This time, even if the third prince didn't want to marry a concubine, he couldn't do anything to them. The minister had thought it through thoroughly, so he was naturally confident. But what he didn't expect was that after he finished speaking, his daughter was pressed in by the palace's shadow guards with disheveled hair. Her clothes were disheveled and there was an ambiguous aura around her. Her eyes were covered by a layer of black cloth and there was a coarse cloth belt around her waist. Along with her was a manservant from his residence. When the minister saw this scene, he knew that it was over. His daughter was good in other aspects, but her temperament was unstable. When she saw a handsome man, she would lose her reserved manner. For this reason, he had already dismissed many people, but he didn't expect that she still hadn't changed her temperament. After the young girl was untied, she didn't have time to pay attention to her surroundings. Her eyes met with her father's face and she instantly panicked. She pulled a manservant over and wanted him to help her cover up. She even said, "Father, I won't dare to do it again. This is the last time, this is really the last time. When your daughter enters the palace, I won't do it again." It was fine if she didn't speak. Once she spoke, it was equivalent to confessing everything. When the minister heard this, he felt dizzy. He only felt a burning pain on his face and he was about to lose his breath. Belegaju's tone was neither fast nor slow and elegant. "This is one of the concubines that His Highness wants this Highness to marry. This Highness knows that she is your only daughter and you have always doted on her. You also hope that she can lead a good life in the future. It would be best if she can be under one person. But you brazenly gave this woman who is having an affair with a manservant to this Highness. This Highness rejected you and you still use the words femme fatale to talk about it. Ah, do you think you are worthy?" This old minister. The minister's lips trembled. His words just now were all gone. Changing from his previous aggressiveness, he knelt on the ground and kowtowed a few times. "Your Highness." This old minister was possessed for a moment. "I beg your Highness to spare this old minister's life for the sake of this old minister's great contributions." When the ministers heard this, they understood what he meant. There was clearly a problem with Miss Wu's style. Official Wu himself also knew. After all, she was his daughter. How could he not know? But Official Wu, for the sake of glory, splendor, and wealth, wanted to send a dirty daughter into the palace. Chapter 705. Not to mention the imperial family, even the common people wouldn't tolerate such a shameful thing. Who would tolerate a woman who fooled around with a manservant as their daughter-in-law? This was simply a matter of wearing a green hat on one's head. It would be strange if the Emperor Emeritus didn't kill him. All of the ministers looked at each other, their faces filled with shock and disdain. None of them had expected Official Wu to be so bold as to do such a thing that would kill all 9 generations of his family. Official Wu's face was ashen, and there was even a trace of blood on his forehead. He fell onto the ground in the main hall. He couldn't have expected this. His daughter's matter was actually known by others, and it was even brought up in public. This time, even if he was an old official who followed the Emperor Emeritus, he couldn't be saved. Official Wu regretted his actions, and his face was full of tears. His legs were trembling so much that they couldn't support themselves. The Emperor Emeritus had long been angry, and his eyes seemed to be able to spit fire. Nonsense. This is simply nonsense. Someone come. Take Wu Yong away for this emperor and behead him directly. Yes. The shadow guards moved very quickly, almost not giving official Wu a chance to say a second word. Eldest Miss Wu, who was kneeling on the ground, didn't want to say anything because such a thing had already happened, and now she was thrown in the main hall for everyone to see. She was so ashamed that she wanted to dig a hole and bury herself. Now that she saw her father being dragged away, she no longer cared about anything else and covered her face as she cried, "Emperor Emeritus, you can't do this. My father has worked hard to follow you for so many years, and the Wu family has also made a lot of contributions. You can't take my father's life because of such a small matter. After all, this matter is all because of the third princess consort." Shut up. It would have been better if eldest Miss Wu didn't speak, but once she did, the Emperor Emeritus's hidden anger completely exploded. He threw the wine cup in his hand and heavily smashed it on the woman's head. "You still dare to take credit for this, Emperor? Just because you made a contribution, I can put a dirty woman like you into my imperial family? You're disgraceful. I'm warning you, don't speak anymore. I'm already being polite by not immediately exterminating your entire Wu clan." Eldest Miss Wu had never seen the retired emperor get angry at her. After all, the status of the Wu family was not low. She usually knew the rules and listened to the retired emperor's praises the most. Now that her forehead was hit, the first thing she felt was pain. After hearing the retired emperor's words, her whole face turned white and red. She was so scared that her whole body went limp. She didn't dare to speak anymore and could only keep kowtowing. None of the people present pleaded for mercy for the father and daughter of the Wu family. Firstly, it was because of the royal family's ruthless methods. Secondly, it was because what Wu Yong did this time was too immoral. In order to let his impure daughter enter the palace, he actually framed the third princess consort as a femme fatale. This kind of person simply deserved to be killed. When Li Zhixiong heard the sound of a blade being drawn from outside the hall, he felt goosebumps rising from the bottom of his heart. His left leg still hurt, but what made him more afraid was not the pain, but the man standing not far from him. The royal family should have known about old Wu's matter long ago. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been so accurate and caught the Wu girl red-handed. If they were smart enough and didn't provoke him, perhaps they wouldn't end up in such a miserable state. However, they poked at the point that he was most concerned about. Li Zhixiong didn't even dare to imagine what was waiting for him. Panic engulfed his entire body like a tidal wave. He couldn't care less about his bleeding left leg. He kept begging for mercy, claiming that he didn't know the eldest daughter of the Wu family looked like this. Beligaju didn't even look at him and didn't let anyone drag him away. He just let him stand in the middle of the hall, trembling in fear. At first, Li Zhixiong was relieved. After half a minute, he realized that the other party did it on purpose. They deliberately left him hanging so that he could have a taste of this kind of pain. In addition, the wound on his left leg kept bleeding. In less than 2 hours, he would die without the royal family's punishment. The retired emperor also hated these two officials to the core. He knew about Wei Wei's performance in the capital. It was hard to find a daughter-in-law like her even if one had a lantern. Suppressing the label of a femme fatale, they had a good idea. When the Shenyuan kingdom's ambassador came, they didn't even have a decent exorcist in their country. What were the 4 great families doing all these years? Each of them only knew how to ask for a marriage alliance and kept retreating. They didn't have the guts that the War Dragon dynasty should have. If it wasn't for Wei Wei, the entire War Dragon dynasty would have lost face. His precious grandson would have become even more unpredictable. Maybe he would kill people like flies, or maybe he wouldn't be as angry as he was now. Whenever the retired emperor thought of the suffering Beligaju went through when he was young and the expression on the child's face when he walked out of the sea of fire, his heart ached. The retired emperor also thought it through. Even if Wei Wei couldn't get pregnant in the future, it didn't matter. After all, there was still little Qi. When little Qi grew up, there would be a bloodline in the royal family. Thinking of this, the retired emperor didn't say anything. He only patted little Qi's head and didn't even look at the bloodstains on the ground. Seeing the retired emperor's attitude, Li Zhixiong became even more flustered. He kept saying, "Retired emperor, you have to believe this old subject. This old subject really doesn't know anything. This old subject is only thinking about how to treat His Highness well and how to treat the imperial family well. That's the only thing that matters to me, retired Emperor. Hellion Vivian obviously knew what His Highness was planning. She also knew what Li Jixiong was saying. This person really deserved to die. However, it wasn't worth it to make the retired Emperor's mood so bloody for such a person. What did you want to say to this Highness? Just as Hellion Wei was engrossed in her thoughts, Bailey Jiaoju had already paced back and forth. His slender and fair fingers picked up the second chestnut, as if he planned to continue feeding her. His movements were graceful and natural, the side of his face was still as handsome and noble as before. It was as if everything that happened in the main hall had nothing to do with her. When Hellion Vivian heard him ask this, she didn't hesitate and directly whispered in his ear, "I'm pregnant." Her voice wasn't loud, but it still carried a languid smile. Belegaju's action of peeling the chestnuts clearly paused. He was stunned for a moment, then he put down the chestnuts in his hand and calmly asked, "What did you say?" When he said this, the man's voice was very low. It was as pleasant and magnetic as usual. "I'm pregnant," Hellion Vivian repeated. She narrowed her eyes and leaned closer to observe a certain Highness's expression. Chapter 706. There was still a faint smile on the man's face. He didn't look any different from before, but that moment of astonishment was real. His usually long and narrow eyes were wide open. In addition, he had now shifted his gaze from her face to her lower abdomen. That speechless expression, as if he couldn't wait to see through her stomach, successfully pleased Hellion Vivian. "Don't you think it's amazing?" Hellion Vivian's smile became more obvious. What made her stunned was that Belegaju bent down and carried her in his arms in the next moment. In just a moment, everyone's gaze shifted from the bloodstains in the Great Hall to the two of them. Even the retired Emperor didn't expect the icy brat to suddenly do such a thing. He frowned. "Arju, what are you doing? You can't be so unruly in the Great Hall. Quickly put Wei down. She's pregnant." It was just a few words, but it was like a bomb that was thrown down. It successfully set off a wave of gasps in the Great Hall. The retired Emperor widened his eyes and stood up from his seat in shock. His voice also lost its usual wisdom. "What did you say?" "Wait. Icy brat, you come back and explain clearly to me." Belegaju didn't care about the noise behind him. He directly carried her and moved a few meters away in a flash. The ministers were already stunned. Everyone maintained their previous actions with their mouths wide open. The retired Emperor pulled Eunuch Sun's hand over and asked anxiously, "Did you hear what that icy brat said?" "He said that Wei is pregnant." Eunuch Sun was also a little dumbfounded. Now that he was pulled by his master, he immediately came back to his senses and nodded repeatedly. "Retired Emperor, you didn't hear wrong. Indeed, the third princess consort is pregnant." "Ha ha ha. Good, good." The retired Emperor said the word good twice in a row. A smile leaked out from his face, and he couldn't hide his happiness. "These two children, hiding such a big thing from me. It's really. You tell me, he's going to be the imperial father, but that icy brat still doesn't understand human feelings." Eunuch Sun reacted quickly. When he heard the retired Emperor's words, he took the lead and knelt on the ground. With a beaming face, he said, "Congratulations, retired Emperor. Our war dragon dynasty is going to have a little prince." After hearing Eunuch Sun's words, the ministers seemed to have woken up from a dream. One by one, they bent their knees and knelt on the ground. Sounds of congratulations overflowed from the main hall. The fact that the princess was pregnant was a joyous occasion for the entire war dragon dynasty. The ministers all had smiles on their faces. "You look at me, I look at you." Words of congratulations to the retired emperor were endless. Li Jixiong, who was bleeding non-stop, listened to the sounds around him. His originally pale face became even paler. It turned out that the third princess consort had been pregnant for a long time. So, everything they did was just to slap their own faces. With them as a foil, not only would Hellion Vivian not lose her position, but the retired emperor would probably only recognize her as his granddaughter-in-law. No matter how extravagant his words were, the retired emperor would never spare him again. As expected, the retired emperor glanced at him with obvious disgust in his eyes. "There's no news in your stomach. I don't want to hear such words in the future." As he spoke, he instructed eunuch Sun, "Pass down my order. In the future, the Li and Wu families will be treated like commoners. They will no longer enjoy the treatment of a century-old family. As for Li Zhixiong himself, throw him into the dungeon and execute him after autumn. Pay attention to his blood and vitality. Don't offend this emperor's precious great-grandson." "Yes, yes, yes." Eunuch Sun responded in succession. He was very thorough in his work. Li Zhixiong had thought of the worst-case scenario, which was that they would offend the third prince. Even if the third prince punished them this time. However, the matter of marrying a consort was imperative. However, he never expected that the third prince would be so ruthless and the third princess consort was actually pregnant. The situation changed too quickly. When Li Zhixiong heard the retired emperor's words, he was so regretful that he wanted to slap himself twice. It was over. This time, it was really over. Not only him, but the entire Li family was doomed. Outside the hall, Hellion Vivian was held in someone's arms. It was inevitable that her movements would be sluggish. She could only continue to ask, "Oh right, do you like boys or girls?" Belegaju's thoughts were still stuck at the previous stage. Humans were too fragile, especially when a woman was pregnant. There were many things that she had to pay attention to. He had just fed her chestnuts. He didn't know if there would be any adverse effects. Moreover, he didn't have any concept of children. Like little Seven, who only knew how to eat. He was a demon. Demons had always been emotionless. Even if he looked very much like a human and learned the elegance and refinement of humans. But in his bones, it was cold. In this world, only the woman in his arms could affect his emotions. As for the one in her stomach, it better be obedient. When Hellion Vivian saw that he didn't speak, she simply pulled a certain highness hand and placed it on her lower abdomen. "He's still moving around in my stomach. He's very lively. Feel it." When Belegaju heard Hellion Vivian's words, he simply let her sit on his long legs. Then, he sat in the ancient pavilion. He leaned over and pressed his ear to Hellion Vivian's lower abdomen. After sensing for a while, the other party didn't move. Gradually, those good-looking thin lips formed a line. Still not moving. Hellion Wei Wei was also puzzled as to why he was so quiet when he was moving non-stop just now. He's probably asleep. Fell asleep. Belegaju didn't deny it. The corner of his mouth was dyed with a cold smile. Demons didn't need to rest at all, let alone sleep. In his opinion, he had eaten too much. Little demons needed a lot of dark energy to replenish themselves every day. Especially the newly formed little demons. No wonder the palace was so clean. There was no need to let the fire Cheline continue to investigate, because the culprit was here. What's wrong? For some reason, Hellion Vivian felt that a certain highness expression was a little strange. Belegaju's hand moved very gently. His voice carried a smile. "Nothing. I just feel that it's necessary to teach him dining etiquette. He scared away all the dead souls in the palace as soon as he came." How stupid. Thinking of this, Belegaju's large palm stroked Hellion Vivian's belly again. However, as if to refute his words, a force came over and fiercely hit his palm. "The baby hasn't been born yet. How can you teach him dining etiquette?" Wait a minute, he moved. He really moved. Hellion Vivian's face was full of surprise. Her smile was gentler than ever. "Did you feel it?" Chapter 707. The baby is not even born yet. How can you teach him dining etiquette? Wait a minute, he moved. He really moved. Hellion Vivian was pleasantly surprised. Her smile was gentler than ever. "Did you feel it?" "Yes." Belegaju slowly narrowed his eyes. Not only did he feel it, but he also felt that the strength of the kick was extraordinarily strong. Hellion Vivian smiled even more happily. She reached out and pushed him away. Then, she happily stroked her belly. She did not know if it was her illusion, but the kick from the baby just now seemed to be heavier than usual. "He must be excited to see you. He is greeting you right now." "Greeting?" Bailey Jiajue, who was pushed away, curved his thin lips. That was not a greeting. He was sure that the thing inside was definitely provoking him. Good, very good. Hellion Vivian, who was immersed in joy, did not notice the meaningful look in His Highness's eyes. However, after returning to Jocheong Hall, there were obviously more palace maids serving her. The retired emperor had specially asked Eunuch Sun to select 2 experienced female physicians to serve Hellion Vivian. The identities of these 2 female physicians had been checked repeatedly. There would be no tampering. The imperial kitchen had also received orders to cook whatever the 3rd princess consort wanted to eat in the future. No matter how late it was, there must be someone waiting on her. This was the most practical thing for Hellion Vivian. Although she had the strawberries from the fantasy space to replenish her energy and reduce her hunger. As a human, Hellion Vivian still preferred to eat normal grains, although those did not seem to have a good filling effect on the baby in her belly. 3 imperial physicians came to the imperial hospital to prepare Hellion Vivian's meals. One of them was Imperial Physician Liu. Dr. Liu had already felt Hellion Vivian's pulse, but when he felt her pulse for the 2nd time, he felt that the pulse was indescribably strange. It must be the pulse of pregnancy, but when he stuck the bamboo earpiece to Hellion Vivian's lower abdomen through the layers of curtains, a crackling sound like sparks sounded fiercely. Dr. Liu was startled. He could not control his strength and threw away the bamboo receiver in his hand. Beligaju narrowed his eyes and put down the teacup in his hand. What's wrong? What's wrong? The rest of the imperial physicians reacted strongly. After all, the 3 of them were in charge of the 3rd princess consort's safety. Although he couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. But what if the 3rd princess consort was pregnant with a boy? That was the War Dragon dynasty's great imperial grandson. Now, the most precious child in the world was the one in 3rd princess consort's arms. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Hellion Vivian, who was sitting behind the barrier, also raised her eyebrows. Did something happen? Dr. Liu shook his head and muttered in his heart, why is there a crackling sound? It's not normal. There's nothing wrong with the pulse and the baby is very healthy. What's wrong? Am I hallucinating? Dr. Liu. Dr. Zhong, who was closest to Dr. Liu, saw that he didn't speak, so he couldn't help but push him. Dr. Liu shuddered. When he came back to his senses, he met Beligaju's indifferent eyes. I don't know what's wrong with me recently. I always have tinnitus. Dr. Liu began to find the problem with himself. Let's leave the auscultation to Dr. Zhong. Beligaju looked at the sweat on Dr. Liu's forehead, and a golden light flashed across his eyes. Hellion Vivian also realized that something was wrong. She reached out and touched her lower abdomen. At this time, Dr. Zhong had picked up the bamboo earpiece on the ground and was about to listen to it. With a cracking sound, a large crack appeared on the end of the bamboo earpiece. Obviously, it was broken and couldn't be used. Dr. Liu found the real reason at this time and said to himself, it turns out that the bamboo earpiece is broken. I thought. It seemed that he was really old and confused. He made a fuss at the slightest sound. Princess, it's okay. The bamboo tube is broken, but judging from the pulse, everything is fine. However, Princess still needs to eat more warm foods. You can't eat crabs and shrimps anymore. Cold fruits should also be reduced. Imperial Dr. Zhong respectfully reported, he didn't dare to show the slightest neglect. Hellion Wei Wei smiled faintly in response, but the light in her eyes was deeper than before. Dr. Liu's reaction just now didn't seem to be as simple as the bamboo earpiece being broken. It seemed that he heard something that he shouldn't have heard. He was frightened and let go of the earpiece at once. Moreover, the people in the Imperial Institute of Medicine had been practicing medicine for so long. It was impossible for them to make mistakes with medical tools and bring a broken bamboo earpiece, unless the bamboo earpiece was broken just now. But it was too coincidental. As soon as it got close to her lower abdomen, it broke. Could it be? It's you, right? Hellion Wei Wei sighed and reached out her hand to caress her lower abdomen. She smiled helplessly with affection. You are simply too naughty, you even scared Imperial Physician Liu. She had long known that her baby would be different from others. So Helene Vivian didn't think it was strange that this happened. Instead, she had a headache. Who could control this little thing when it was born? He was really too naughty. If you continue to be so naughty, there will be no spiritual strawberries tonight. Even though she felt wronged, the fetus in her belly moved. Helene Vivian also felt it. She shook her head with a smile and educated the little thing in her belly. Mom knows that you don't like others to touch you. Mom won't let them use the bamboo earpiece to listen in the future. But you have to be good. Do you hear me? Don't scare people casually. It was said that mother and child were connected. Even if the baby was not born, it seemed that he could still sense what Helene Vivian was saying. In order to show that he was very obedient. Soon, Helene Vivian's lower abdomen stopped moving. It sounded like he fell asleep after doing something bad. Helene Vivian let him go, but it didn't mean that His Highness would let him go. After sending a group of imperial physicians away, Beligaju walked toward the screen. He reached out and waved all the palace maids away. He lifted the curtain and looked at Helene Vivian's lower abdomen with raised eyebrows. Helene Vivian was yawning. Obviously, she was sleepy and a little drowsy. Perhaps it was because of her pregnancy, but she looked even lazier than before. She leaned against the headboard lazily, her long black hair cascading down and falling on her pure-colored underwear, making her skin look even fairer and more translucent. Especially when she was half asleep and her eyes were hazy, she looked even more beautiful. Beligaju's eyes darkened. He reached out and picked her up. Layers of curtains fell behind him without any wind. It was extremely luxurious and beautiful. Chapter 708. When Helene Vivian saw that it was His Highness, she asked in a daze, "Where are Imperial Physician Liu and the others?" "They're all gone." Bailey Jiaoju held her hand in his palm and carefully played with it. The gentleness in his pair of eyes was more devilish than usual. "If you're tired, then go to sleep. When you're asleep, I still have things to do. Today, I won't take your pulse again. I'll have someone warm some soup for you. You can drink it when you wake up." Millimeter. Helene Wei was indeed sleepy. Since yesterday, she had been very sleepy. Not to mention, with His Highness around, his familiar and pleasant scent, coupled with his steady heartbeat, she always felt at peace. Beligaju stroked Helene Vivian's black hair with his fingers and lowered his eyes to kiss the top of her head. Eunuch Sun originally came to visit Helene Vivian under the orders of the retired emperor. When he saw this scene through the curtains, he quietly left the bedroom with the palace maids who were holding the reward behind him. At night, Helene Vivian was sleeping very soundly. Her side profile was quiet and gentle. Little Black and Little White also hid in the Xuanhuan space. With Beligaju by Helene Vivian's side, no evil things could get close to Helene Vivian. If they came out, they would waste Helene Vivian's excess essence. The night was getting darker and darker. Every time at this time, Beligaju would hold Helene Vivian and sleep for a few hours. However, today, not only did he not sleep, he stood up and poured himself a cup of herbal tea. He sat on the chaise lounge and did not get on the bed. Instead, he elegantly crossed his slender legs. His black ancient robe completely accentuated his evilness like that of Satan in the dark night. It was different from the indifference and nobility seen during the day. Now, even the smile on his face was tinged with a faint evil aura. He spun the teacup in his hand with one hand. He wore a little ring on his little finger. The black gem on the ring shone with an evil light that matched him extremely well. It was eager to devour something. Feathers rose from behind him one after another. It was as if someone was chanting ancient Sanskrit, as if it could reflect all the prosperity in the world. His aura was grand and majestic, making it impossible for people to hide. "Come out." These two simple words were spoken in a voice that was as calm as ice. It imperceptibly revealed a sense of deterrence. "I'll count to 3. Little brat, if you don't come out, you know the consequences." In Helene Vivian's lower abdomen, black fog lingered and blood flowed. The transparent fetus shape could not be seen, only covered by a thin layer of hair. After hearing Beligaju's words, its body moved. With a crashing sound, the black feathers clumped together and emitted a faint light in the corner. A small figure could be faintly seen. The figure was very small. Its lips curled, looking cool and soft. It opened its mouth and said, "You can't hit me. If you hit me, Mother will be sad." "Are you threatening me?" Beligaju sneered, and the black feathers changed. The small figure was bound by the feathers and was very unconvinced. It was Father who said I was stupid first. "Are you not stupid?" Beligaju continued to drink his tea. "This is the human world. Isn't the trouble you caused during the day enough? You broke the bamboo tubes and deliberately made a sound to scare Imperial Dr. Liu. Do you only know such low-level pranks?" The little figure snorted with an undetectable arrogance. "How can I let those stupid humans see my naked body? If they want to see Father, will Father let them see? This king won't, but this king has many methods to prevent them from spying on this king. For example, I can break all their bamboo tubes in advance and not wait until they touch you to counterattack. This way, the suspicion will fall on your mother. This king doesn't care what method you use, but don't cause trouble for your mother." Beligaju's voice was very light. A pair of clear peach blossom eyes revealed a deep golden light, and the handsome side of his face was filled with warning. The small figure also knew that if others knew that the child in his mother's womb was different from normal humans, it would definitely not be good for his mother. He did that during the day because he couldn't control himself. After doing it, he regretted it. Now that he was reprimanded by Beligaju, he lowered his head guiltily and said, "Then what about Father? Don't think that I can't hear because I am in Mother's womb. Today, there were people in the hall who wanted you to marry a concubine. Those people were simply looking for trouble with Mother. You should have just killed them all. Why did you leave one person alive? Little brat, as a demon, the first thing you need to learn is to understand humans." Beligaju shook the teacup and casually took a sip. There are many ways to make a human suffer more than killing him. The small figure frowned. He knew that humans were very greedy and stupid. For example, the two ministers in the hall today were simply disgusting. His first reaction was to kill all of them. But now that I think about it, other than their lives, they should be more afraid of losing the power in their hands. Also, your dining etiquette. Beligaju glanced at him. You have to eat little by little. Don't limit yourself to one area. There are many exorcists in the divine continent. You have to learn to do things without leaving any traces. A perfect and elegant disguise so that no one will suspect your identity. Then I will think about what those people who are disrespectful to Mother are afraid of. I will secretly get rid of them and then find a scapegoat." They were indeed father and son. Without saying too much, the small figure had completely understood his father's meaning. He clenched his small fist and said seriously, "But you can't let Mother know that the babies in the palace were scared away by me." Bailey Jiaoju devilishly curved his lower lip as he unhurriedly put down the teacup in his hand. "That depends on how you perform next. Now, you can go back." Humph. The black feather fell. In the dim light, the small figure had already disappeared. It was obvious that the father and son were the kind of people who disliked each other. However, when it came to protecting Helly and Vivian, they had reached a high level of consensus. On the same night, all the medical equipment related to handsets in the Imperial Academy of Medicine were all shattered. Everyone in the Li family in the west of the city said that they had seen a ghost. They were so scared that they hid in the house and did not dare to come out. Without the retired emperor's punishment, Li Zhixiong had already gone crazy. Everyone said that it was retribution, that the Li family had killed the civilians and was seeking revenge. In fact, "Brother, aren't you worried that Father will call you out for a private talk?" The two fetuses in the lower abdomen leaned their heads together and communicated in a language that only they could understand. Chapter 709. The smaller, transparent fetus on the left was obviously weaker. His form was also blurry as he spoke slowly. The bigger one on the right was cool and soft. "No, I found a scapegoat this time. I didn't cause any trouble for Mother. But didn't Mother say that we shouldn't be naughty? You broke the bamboo tube again. Won't Mother be unhappy? She thinks that we don't listen to her." The smaller fetus voice was very slow and low. The bigger fetus finally realized something and moved with a bang. Damn it. It's father. Father tricked me. It's okay. Mother loves us very much. She won't be angry. Brother, don't be tricked by father in the future. The smaller fetus dragged his voice. But father is right. We have to be more careful in the future. Be good tomorrow and don't cause any trouble for mother. Okay. The bigger fetus hugged the smaller one tightly and seemed a little unhappy. Why are you getting smaller and smaller? Eat more tomorrow. Brother will give you all of brother's food. The smaller fetus had not fully developed. Saying a few words was already his limit. Now that he heard his older brother's words, he did not respond. Instead, he fell into a deep sleep. The bigger fetus was still working hard to develop. Like a seedling, once it was formed, it would grow very quickly. Black fog and a steady stream of spirit chi lingered around him. After a while, the bigger fetus moved his eyelids. His beautiful eyes slowly opened like flowing blood, filled with a strong demonic aura. I want to get out of here as soon as possible. The nutrition here can't satisfy me anymore. The next day, the entire Imperial Hospital was in chaos. The bamboo tubes that were prepared for the third Princess Consort's auscultation were all broken. Also, the golden wires that were used to check the pulse were broken everywhere. Some people said that it was because of rats. Others said that the bamboo tubes were left out for too long, causing them to break. The imperial physicians of the Imperial Hospital had never encountered such a situation. They were all dumbfounded. Before the bamboo tubes were sent, they could only use the simplest method to diagnose Hellion Vivian's condition. Fortunately, Hellion Vivian's pulse was very stable, which relieved a lot of the burden on the imperial physicians. Medicinal cuisine was still a must, and Hellion Wei could eat it too. Under normal circumstances, she could eat as much as 4 or 5 normal pregnant women. The imperial physicians felt that it was time, so they didn't think too much about it. On the other hand, Hellion Vivian looked even more helpless after hearing the news from the court of imperial physicians. It had only been one night. The baby's prank escalated. Furthermore, it was obvious that this was a smart move. Not only did they destroy all the bamboo earpieces in the palace, but they also removed Imperial Physician Liu's suspicion. Now, everyone in the palace was looking for the rats to prevent them from causing trouble in the Imperial Hospital. Who would have thought that the real culprit was actually in her stomach? Don't do that, do you hear me? Hellion Vivian was different from Beligaju. When teaching children, she had to let them know what was right and what was wrong. This was not inflexible. It was just what parents should do. She knew that her child would have something that many people couldn't have in their lifetime from the moment he was born. But because of this, she couldn't let the baby go astray. However, it was obvious that the baby didn't understand this. Otherwise, he wouldn't have aggrieved and encouraged her. Hellion Wei reclined on the soft couch, put aside the book she was just reading, and extended her hand to stroke her lower abdomen. Within her indolence, there was gentleness. Think about it, those bamboo tubes in the Imperial Academy of Medicine are all used to treat people. If you destroy them, what if someone falls ill? What's more, Imperial Physician Liu and Imperial Physician Zhong are very good to me. They are also old people. It's very difficult for them to find a job in the palace. You still make it difficult for them. Baby, I don't care whether you like to fight or not in the future, and how many bad things you do, but you have to remember one thing. Don't show your strength to the weak. It will only make you look ridiculous. The sound of her stomach became listless, as if it was admitting its mistake. Okay, I know you didn't do it on purpose. Hellion Vivian stroked her lower abdomen again. Go to the south study room to find your father later, okay? It's said that whether the child is good-looking or not, the key is to look at the facial features when you are pregnant. You have to look at your father's appearance more, and then you will look like him in the future. No. I don't want to learn from my father. Mother, when I go out, I will be more handsome than my father. The smaller fetus listened and laughed. Brother, even if you shout for a long time, mother won't hear you. Anyway, I don't want to learn from my father. The bigger fetus took care of the smaller fetus dutifully. Did you eat today? Brother will give you some spiritual energy. With that, the two fetus heads touched again, I don't know if mother will like us after we go out. The smaller fetus sucked in 2 breaths of spiritual energy. His voice, which had never been loud, was filled with yearning. She will definitely like it. Every time mother touches her belly, her movements are very gentle. Furthermore, she will talk to us. According to human behavior, mother will definitely like us very much. Well, then we have to go out quickly. The bigger fetus moved. When the time comes, we will be able to see mother. Now we can only see father, and only father can hear us when we talk. It is very boring. Beligaju also felt bored. When the little demon was formed, it would cut off the connection between him and Vivian. Now he didn't know what Vivian was thinking. This kind of thing that was beyond his control always made him feel very uncomfortable. What was even more uncomfortable was that Vivian put most of her energy on her belly, and the number of times she kissed him obviously decreased. Little ghosts were indeed very troublesome. Hellion Vivian also saw the awkwardness of His Highness. She smiled and took the initiative to hug his waist from behind. Do you think our baby will be a boy or a girl? A boy. He had already seen the little demon yesterday, and he didn't like it. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. How do you know? It will only be a little demon if it eats so much. Beligaju smiled, and his voice was still low and pleasant. In fact, he was just slandering his own son. Hellion Vivian took it seriously, and put her face on Beligaju's back, and said with a puzzled voice, if it is a boy, will he have to go to private school from a young age? I think all the ancient princes were like this. They also had to practice swordsmanship and learn the art of war, so that they could be useful in war. Didn't you like to read the art of war when you were young? Yes. Bailey Jiaoju put down the ancient scroll in his hand, his handsome side profile raised an arc. He liked reading those books, not because he wanted to fight, but because he wanted to be able to kill people more perfectly. He believed that the little brat would like it too. This was the nature of a demon. Chapter 710. However, the way she hugged him still made Beligaju very happy. A smile appeared on his noble and handsome face. Beligaju immediately turned around and pulled Hellion Vivian into his arms. He lowered his head and kissed her lips. Hellion Vivian was stunned for a moment. Then, a smile gradually appeared on her face. It was a very gentle kiss. It seemed that a certain highness had learned to restrain himself for the sake of her health. With this thought in mind, Hellion Vivian cooperated a lot. However, Beligaju paused. He raised his beautiful eyes and asked, so obedient. I'm pregnant. Naturally, I have to be more obedient. Hellion Vivian knew what he meant when she saw his gaze. Her face turned a little red. Beligaju took a deep breath and looked at Hellion Vivian's lower abdomen. There was a hint of anger in his usually elegant and light tone. Tormenting brat. I'll throw him away when he comes out. Don't say that. The baby will hear it. Hellion Vivian looked at his slightly furrowed brows and laughed out loud. The baby will come out soon. When he turns into a little bun, he will chase after us and ask us to hold him. You will like it. Ha! Beligaju smiled evilly. Don't let that happen. Otherwise, he would really grab the little brat's leg and throw him out. It was one thing to disturb them before they were born, but after they were born, he wanted to be a third wheel. He probably sensed the disdain from his father. The big fetus protested in disdain. Who would want their father to hold them? Their father was cold and hard. Their mother was better. Their mother liked them the most. By the way, how could I forget? Didn't you raise little Chi before? How did you feel at that time? Hellion Vivian felt that she should learn from the experience of being a parent. Bailey Jiaoju only gave her 2 words, you can eat. Hellion Vivian, she did ask the wrong person. It was mainly because a certain highness's teaching method was wrong. Little Seven was such a cute child, but she was led astray by him. My baby mustn't be influenced by him again. What if he accidentally implanted some wrong outlook on life? What should I do? As it turned out, Hellion Vivian's worries were not unfounded. Even when he didn't like his son, His Highness would still take the time to educate his son on what the basic qualities of a demon were. Therefore, the bigger fetuses began to observe humans while they were still in the womb. Not for anything else, but to better disguise and make use of them after they were born. Other than his mother, any other human being was no more than a pawn in his eyes. However, these were not important. What was important was how to be a good brother. Of course, this was not taught by his father. Based on his understanding of his imperial father, other than his imperial mother, no one else could arouse the slightest bit of imperial father's concern. Since they were both demons, the bigger fetus was not surprised at all. Instead, he hugged the smaller fetus even tighter. He even told the smaller fetus about how he had gone out to scare people at night and told the smaller fetus a bedtime story. The bigger fetus really wanted to go out as soon as possible. Other than wanting to see his imperial mother, he also wanted to hear the smaller fetus call him Big Brother. With Belagaju's guidance, the bigger fetus knew how to remove all traces of his actions. Nothing suspicious happened in the imperial palace. Other than the surroundings of Jocheong Hall being exceptionally clean, everything else was normal. The Emperor Emeritus was someone who understood his ice-cold grandson. He found time to ask Belagaju to stay behind so that he could have a private chat. Since you're going to be a father, you have to act like one. You can't raise my precious great-grandson like how you raised little Seven. Also, don't teach him all those nonsensical ideas of yours. The child is not born yet. Even if he is, he's still young. Let him enjoy himself first. The Emperor Emeritus was a very wise person. Once he said such words, it was obvious how much he loved this unborn great-grandson of his. Eunuch's son understood the Emperor Emeritus very well. Every day, he followed the Emperor Emeritus's instructions and took care of Jocheong Hall inside and outside. He hadn't even seen the little master yet, but he was already so fond of him. If he was really born, the Emperor Emeritus might really ignore state affairs and play with the little master all day long. Little Seventh Prince was the same. He only knew how to eat in the past. Now, when he was eating, he didn't forget to say that it was for the baby. He even held the goldfish in his mouth very righteously. The fish seedlings that he had painstakingly fished out from Jiangnan were almost gone again. Little Seventh Prince also didn't let go of the wild goose that the Emperor Emeritus was rearing. This time, the Emperor Emeritus wasn't angry. He even silently allowed little Seventh Prince to do as he pleased in the palace. He even said that he wanted to hunt a dragon for the baby. The Emperor Emeritus didn't stop him. It was obvious how much the Emperor Emeritus doted on the unborn little master. When Belagaju heard the Emperor Emeritus's words, he seemed to have thought of something. Suddenly, he smiled and put down the teacup in his hand. He stood up and said calmly, "If Imperial Grandfather is worried that I can't raise the child well, you can raise the child yourself when he is born." The Emperor Emeritus paused. Joy colored the corners of his mouth. He pretended to be calm and said, "You should follow me normally. With your temperament, if you raise a little ice cube, that girl Weiwei won't be angry with you." "Yes." Belagaju's voice was very calm, as if he didn't care. "But, Imperial Grandfather will have to talk to Weiwei about this matter when the time comes." The Emperor Emeritus didn't know that his grandson was setting a trap for him. When he thought of hugging his little great-grandson and enjoying family happiness in the future, he didn't care about anything else. "Of course, I know this. You should smile more in the future. Don't do those unimportant things in the South Study Room. Spend more time with Weiwei." Belagaju didn't need to listen to the rest of the words. After all, the problem had been solved. In the future, if the little brat was disobedient and disturbed them, he would directly kick him to Xingyang Palace. Weiwei had always been soft-hearted. If the Emperor Emeritus wanted to see the child, she couldn't stop him. No matter how smart the bigger fetus was, he didn't expect his father to do this. He was still nestled in Hellion Vivian's stomach, absorbing the nutrients around him. That night, Hellion Vivian felt that a certain prince's mood seemed to be better than 2 days ago. She couldn't help but be curious. Did something good happen today? Why do you ask? Belagaju lazily hugged her and fed her red dates with one hand. There was even a smile on his face. Something good must have happened. Hellion Vivian reached out and poked his face. "You are smiling. It's just solving a small problem." When Belagaju said this, he intentionally or unintentionally glanced at Hellion Vivian's lower abdomen. Chapter 7:11. Seeing this, Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and asked, "What's wrong? Dr. Liu, is there something wrong with my pulse?" "No. Maybe my golden thread is broken." While answering Hellion Wei, Imperial Physician Liu checked the golden thread that was used to check his pulse. "That's strange. It's not broken. Why is that?" Hellion Vivian saw Dr. Liu's expression and knew that it was not simple. Based on the series of things that happened a few days ago, she knew that the surprise and confusion on Dr. Liu's face must have something to do with the baby in her belly. Dr. Liu couldn't find the reason after searching for a long time, so he said to Hellion Vivian, "Princess, do you mind letting me feel your pulse?" In ancient times, when the imperial physicians treated the women in the harem, they were very particular about many things. Feeling the pulse through the golden thread was one of them. Dr. Liu dared to make this request to Hellion Vivian because he knew that the third princess was different from the women he had seen before. As expected, Hellion Vivian reached out her left hand with a faint smile and said, "Doctors don't mind. Dr. Liu, please." Dr. Liu nodded. This time, he felt the pulse very seriously. But the more serious he was, the wider his eyes were. Even his pupils were shaking in disbelief. Hellion Wei could see that he was trying his best to suppress his astonishment. Perhaps it was because there were other imperial physicians and palace maids around. Imperial Physician Liu did not immediately report the pulse. Instead, he glanced around. Hellion Wei had always been a thoughtful person. Seeing him like this, she waved her hand and dismissed the palace maids who were serving her. Even the other imperial physicians were sent away by Hellion Wei with a good excuse, leaving only Imperial Physician Liu behind. Seeing that everyone had left, Dr. Liu thought about his words and said, "Princess, the pulse of the fetus you are pregnant with is very strange. A normal fetus will not have such a pulse when it is less than 2 months old. When we checked your pulse a few days ago, your pulse was not like this. But after a few days, your pulse changed. Logically speaking, the fetus in your belly can't grow so fast. It doesn't look like a 2-month-old fetus, but more like a 5-month-old fetus. In just a few days, your pulse changed. Logically speaking, the fetus in your belly can't grow so fast. It doesn't look like a 2-month-old fetus, but more like a 5-month-old one. In just a few days, this old one really doesn't know how the fetus grew. This old one will say something disrespectful. When this old one was practicing medicine, this old one heard from the older generation that in some villages near the mountains, there would be young girls who would mysteriously get pregnant. After that, the young girl would often not be able to tell who the father was. But the child in her belly was very stubborn. No matter what, the fetus would not be able to escape. Not only that, the fetus grew very fast. In just a few days, it could absorb a month's worth of nutrients from a normal fetus. Usually, these young girls would either go crazy or become stupid. In the end, their vitality would be sucked away by the fetus. Later, my master told me that the girl was pregnant with a ghost. Only when she was pregnant would she look like this. Imperial Physician Liu paused and then knelt on the ground. This old official is not saying this to scare the princess. This old official should not say these words, but this old official's pulse is very similar to the one that this old official had diagnosed at that time. This old official is worried that. Hellion Vivian helped Dr. Liu stand up and said, "Dr. Liu, you don't have to worry about the nutrition. But I want to ask you for a favor. Princess Consort, you." Imperial Physician Liu finally realized that the third Princess Consort had already known the difference. "Please tell me." Hellion Wei's voice was calm, but there was a hint of a smile in it. "The baby I'm pregnant with is just a little more edible, but everything else is normal. Imperial Physician Liu has also checked his pulse, so you should know that he's very healthy. I hope that Imperial Physician Liu can say this to the retired Emperor or His Highness." Dr. Liu's voice tightened, "But Princess Consort, if the baby keeps growing like this, I'm afraid your body can't take it." "I'm fine." Hellion Vivian stroked her belly, "The baby is very obedient. Dr. Liu, you have to remember that it's just an ordinary baby. And you don't have to doubt its bloodline. It's a real member of the royal family, not a ghost. Dr. Liu knew that the princess consort wanted to keep the baby. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He had seen many women in the harem. Every one of them treated the baby as a bargaining chip. Once they found something was wrong, they would abort the baby. Especially when they found out that they were pregnant with a girl, those concubines would rather pretend that they were framed by others to win the emperor's pity. Even the empress at that time almost wanted to abort the third prince because of his abnormal fetus. Of course, that was what the empress said to the public. In fact, these old imperial physicians in the palace all knew that when the empress was pregnant with the third prince, for some reason, she liked to eat chicken. The way she ate was like she was bewitched. Every time they saw it, they would feel frightened. Later, the third prince was born, and the palace was peaceful. But because of this, the empress had always hated the third prince and never changed her mind. Dr. Liu even felt that the empress didn't want to have the third prince. There were very few people in the harem like the third princess consort, who knew that something was wrong but still wanted to keep the baby. And it was very likely that the birth of this baby would kill the princess consort. Dr. Liu was also an old man, so he was very soft-hearted. He didn't treat Helene Vivian as an outsider. Now that he heard her decision, it was hard to describe the feeling in his heart. In the end, he could only respond, yes. Helene Vivian looked at him and smiled. Dr. Liu, I'm really fine. The baby needs spiritual energy. It'll be fine as long as it has enough spiritual energy. Of course, other than spiritual energy, the baby seemed to need something else. But Helene Vivian didn't know what it was. She could only feel that every night, there would be spiritual energy fusing in her stomach. It always gave Helene Vivian the illusion that the baby ran out to grab something to eat. If it needs spiritual energy, Dr. Liu thought for a while and said, would it be better to tell His Highness? Helene Vivian paused and tapped her fingers on the wooden table. Wait. I'll tell him when I think of an excuse. She was going to tell Bailey Jiaju, but she knew that man better than anyone else. If there was anything that would harm her, he would immediately clean it up. She did not want him to be hostile to the babies before they were born. Moreover, as she said, she didn't think it was a big deal. After all, the strawberries in the fantasy space were enough for her to eat for a long time. But there was one thing that Dr. Liu didn't diagnose. She only realized it today. She didn't have the spiritual energy to subdue demons, and the martial qi to control the wind had weakened. Chapter 7:12. Brother, we can eat so much. Won't mother's body be unable to bear it? The smaller fetus moved his newly formed palm. The bigger fetus reached out and hugged him. He thought for a while and said, don't worry. Father is here. He will find a way. If he can't even solve such a small matter, how can he be our father? I'll go out tonight and catch a few more dead souls for you to eat. I don't want to eat anymore. Brother, you can eat. You need more energy. The smaller fetus spoke slowly but steadily. The bigger fetus didn't speak. He looked at the smaller fetus and reached out his small hand to hug him. There was a glimmer of light in his blood-red eyes. Without spiritual power, Helene Vivian was still Helene Vivian. She ate and slept as usual. However, it was obvious that there were more mercenaries around her, and the large wolfhound by her side had never left her side since then. Dr. Liu was very anxious. Every time he came to the auscultate, he was afraid that the royal would ask him something. But this day still came. The royal called him to the south study room alone. He was holding a memorial in his hand. He was wearing a long robe. The brocade was sky brocade and the muslin was cloud gauze. The silk was faintly shining, as if it was shrouded in the clouds of the night. Dr. Liu looked at the scroll in his fair hand. There was a faint indifference in his dark eyes. Tell me, what's wrong with her? Dr. Liu didn't expect the royal to ask so directly. He originally thought that the other party would at least start by asking about his diet and pulse. But it was obvious that the royal already knew something. Dr. Liu didn't dare to hide anything. He knelt on the ground and told everything in detail, trembling. The fetus is abnormal. She's growing too fast. During the entire process, Bailey Jiaju only listened with an indifferent expression. He held the memorial in his hand with one hand, seemingly somewhat absent-minded. However, those who were familiar with him all knew that at this moment, Third Prince was the one who made people feel that it was the most difficult to fathom. Dr. Liu, how long have you been in the palace? When Bailey Jiaoju said this, he turned sideways and threw the memorial in his hand to the side. His clothes were dragging on the ground as he looked at Imperial Physician Liu with his black hair and deep eyes. He was so handsome that he looked like a god standing in the clouds. Dr. Liu didn't understand why the Third Prince suddenly asked him such a question. After thinking for a while, his forehead was full of cold sweat. Your Highness, it has been more than 30 years. That's quite a long time. Beligaju turned the black jade thumb ring on his finger. His voice did not change at all. Since she let you stay, I won't do anything to you. However, Dr. Liu, you must remember what she said. Otherwise. At the end, Beligaju smiled. His jade-like elegance didn't diminish in the slightest. However, Imperial Dr. Liu understood the deeper meaning behind those words. He had always known about His Highness's methods. The dead were the best at keeping secrets. According to the usual practice, an imperial physician like him couldn't be allowed to stay. After leaving the South Study, Imperial Dr. Liu heaved a sigh of relief. It was the third Princess Consort who saved his life. He was also glad that he didn't mention anything about the fetus to anyone. Because in the palace, nothing could be hidden from His Highness. However, compared to the fetus, His Highness seemed to be more interested in what the third Princess Consort said to him that day. Imperial Dr. Liu couldn't understand what His Highness meant, but he knew that he couldn't mention the word ghost fetus in the future, especially to the retired emperor. The great-grandson was just an ordinary fetus, no different from an ordinary person. Master. Hearing Bailey Jiaoju's call, the green dragon and the fire Cheline showed themselves one after another. Auspicious qi filled the entire South Study room. Beligaju's voice was very calm. Go to the Netherworld and get some dead souls. Huh! We're going against the Netherworld again. Green Dragon's voice was full of excitement. Fire Cheline looked at it silently. Beligaju continued, don't let the two death gods of the Netherworld know. In other words, they were going to steal. Green Dragon and Fire Cheline looked at each other. They felt that this kind of thing. What? Do you have any objections? Beligaju smiled at the two chariots. It was quite a beautiful sight. Fire Cheline immediately shook its huge head. No objections. How could it dare to have any objections? Then go quickly. Beligaju stood up and stood straight. He said slowly, bring the little king of hell here too. I have something to ask him. Stealing is not enough, but you want to kidnap his son. Master, are you really not afraid of the big king of hell? Even if you're not afraid, have you ever considered that we'll be beaten to death? That person will treat you as a love rival for the rest of his life. We've been hunted down by him for many years. Beligaju was quite open-minded. If we meet the king of hell, we'll use his son to threaten him. Fire Cheline and Green Dragon. This is a really good idea, but first, they had to enter safely. The two-headed dog of the Netherworld had a better nose than the dogs of the mortal world. They didn't know how much the big king of hell hated their master. Back then, they took a piece of clothing that their master didn't want and let the two-headed dog smell it all day long. When the dog saw them, its eyes would light up as if it had seen ham. You'll be in charge of luring that stupid dog away. I'll be in charge of kidnapping the little king of hell. Fire Cheline was the first to speak. Green Dragon sneered. Then who's in charge of capturing the dead spirits? Fire Cheline. Bring the sky-swallowing beast along. Green Dragon continued to sneer. If it goes, it can swallow the entire Netherworld. Then what do you think we should do? Fire Cheline was angry. Green Dragon thought for a moment and said, bring it. You're not afraid that it will swallow the entire Netherworld? It was Fire Cheline's turn to sneer. Green Dragon said slowly, let it go in its human form. When the dead spirits see it, they will rush over. Let it tie up the dead spirits and bring them back to the Little Master. At the mention of the Little Master, Fire Cheline's eyes darkened. It seemed to be thinking about something. Logically speaking, it's impossible for a mortal to successfully give birth to a demon. Those demons that have successfully survived all become demons by consuming the mother's body. Obviously, the princess is different. What are you trying to say? Green Dragon frowned. Fire Chalene's claws moved forward. I'm thinking if the princess has the Buddha bone. Green Dragon paused. Then think about it carefully. Tell Master after you've thought about it. The Buddha bone. That wasn't something that anyone could have. Okay. Fire Chalene walked forward thoughtfully. In fact, this wasn't what it wanted to say the most. It wanted to say that it was worried that once the child was born, the princess would lose her connection with this world. Back then, in order to find the 3 souls of its master, there was a little loophole in history. This loophole made Fire Chalene very uneasy. It couldn't explain why, but it felt that the 3rd princess consort had returned to the place where she belonged. The reason why she didn't disappear now was that she had the bloodline related to its master in her womb. Chapter 7:13. When Fire Chalene and Green Dragon found Little Seven, he was holding a goldfish for Hellion Vivian. When Little Seven saw Green Dragon, he immediately handed the goldfish to the eunuch who was waiting at the side. Then, he looked at Green Dragon with bright eyes. His little face was very serious. Green Dragon felt goosebumps all over his body. What are you doing? I'm going to catch you and feed you to my royal nephew. The little one said very seriously. 3rd sister-in-law said that when the baby was born, he would have to call him royal uncle. He would be a real man in the future. He had to improve his aura. Green Dragon suspected that there was something wrong with his ears. Did he just say feed? Fire Chalene held back its laughter. Dragons are indeed very nutritious for the princess consort. Eating you is equivalent to eating countless dragon pills. In some aspects, Tunchin is very powerful. That's because he doesn't know that eating you is equivalent to eating countless Ganoderma lucidum. Green Dragon rolled its eyes. Little Seven heard their conversation and took out the beast-binding rope to tie the 2 of them up. As he tied them up, he said, "Since both of you are useful, I'll catch both of you and feed you to my royal nephew." Green Dragon and Fire Chalene were speechless. Let go. Who gave him the beast-binding rope? Don't you know to give this to a foodie? He dares to tie up anything to eat. It must be Master. Oh. Little Seven really felt that the prey was too noisy this time. He frowned and said, "Be quiet. You'll disturb others." Green Dragon and Fire Chalene were speechless. They couldn't be quiet. They were about to be eaten. How could they be quiet? Master said to pay attention to the dining posture. Don't force me to do it. Little Seven turned around and gave the 2 divine beasts a warning look. Fire Chalene shouted behind, "You've already done it. Beating you up doesn't count." Little Seven replied seriously and continued to drag the 2 of them forward. Green Dragon was so angry that his dragon veins were bulging. Beating him up doesn't count. Then what counts as beating him up? It's all your fault. You insisted on finding Tunchin. No matter how powerful Fire Chalene was, it couldn't break free from Beligaju's beast-binding rope. It could only fight with Green Dragon in the middle of the rope. Green Dragon also wanted to chop the little one who was dragging them forward. Damn it. Who can stop this foodie? Could it be that they couldn't see him dragging those 2 behemoths forward? The eunuchs and maids did see it, but it was obvious that they were used to Little Seven's eating habits. Anyway, the 7th prince had been clamoring to catch a dragon these days. They didn't expect that he would really catch one. Other than admiration, they didn't have the slightest intention to stop him. Xiaoqi chuckled as he walked forward. When he arrived at the Jochong Hall, he threw the 2 beasts in front of Hellion Vivian and said with vigor, "I caught them." Hellion Vivian was originally eating strawberries, but when she saw the Azure Dragon and the Fire Kirin's claws scratching the ground, she couldn't help but laugh. What's going on? The Fire Chalene couldn't help but explain the cause and effect. Actually, his main content was to describe how unreasonable the heaven-devouring beast was. Who would have thought that Hellion Wei Wei would raise her eyebrows, and unhurriedly asked, "Go to hell? Catching dead spirits? Only then did the Fire Kareen realize that he had mentioned something that he shouldn't have, so he didn't mention catching dead spirits again. However, it was obvious that Hellion Vivian wouldn't give up easily when she encountered something that interested her. Moreover, as smart as she was, she had already guessed some of the things that had happened. Did His Highness see Imperial Physician Liu today? The Fire Kareen didn't say anything, and the Azure Dragon didn't say anything either. Hellion Vivian smiled. You are very loyal to His Highness, and I admire that. However, I admire those who adapt to circumstances even more. Little Seven, you can go burn the firewood. The Azure Dragon and the Kareen will definitely prefer to talk to us in hot water. To put it bluntly, she was going to cook them. The Azure Dragon and the Fire Kareen looked at each other, but they were still relatively calm. After all, their skin was thick, so it wouldn't be a problem even if they were cooked. However, Hellion Wei Wei's next sentence made them jump up in unison. Oh right, remember to add some seasonings, such as chili powder or something like that. That way, you can make things more flavorful. Call more spiritual beasts to watch. I think those little spiritual beasts will definitely be very interested in this scene. The Fire Kareen, who cared about face, immediately stiffened. Wait a minute. What? You want to say it now? Hellion Vivian sat back down and looked at the Fire Kareen with a smile. The Azure Dragon pulled the Fire Kareen and said in a low voice, if you are not afraid of Master being angry, you can say it. But Princess wants the spirit beasts to watch our naked bodies. The Fire Kareen said in a very aggrieved manner, how can I have any face as the boss? Moreover, I am not the same as you, this lascivious dragon. I still want to find my other half. The Azure Dragon sneered, if Master finds out, don't mention your other half, you won't have one for the rest of your life. The Fire Kareen bit his lip. Why am I always the one who gets hurt? Third sister-in-law, I've brought the pot over. Little Seven was always very capable, especially when it came to eating. The Fire Kareen turned around and fainted. Where did this child find the big cauldron? Did everyone in the palace die? Why didn't anyone say anything about it? Little Seven felt that the Fire Kareen's gaze was provoking him. He put down the big cauldron on his shoulder and said in a very domineering manner, I'll take off your clothes in a while. Just as the Fire Kareen was desperately trying to protect its fur with its claws, a person walked in from outside the Jocheong Hall. His legs were straight, his posture was straight, and his movements were elegant. His deep golden eyes fell on the Fire Kareen and the Azure Dragon. His voice was very indifferent. Why is it so lively? Master. The Fire Kareen and the Azure Dragon turned their heads in unison to look over. Hellion Vivian did not expect him to come at this time. Why aren't you in the South Study Room? I was originally here. Belegaju's voice slowly slid past the two's ears. He naturally pulled Hellion Vivian over, but someone did something stupid, so I'm here to clean up the mess. The Fire Kareen and the Azure Dragon heard this and their necks shrank. They inexplicably felt cold all over their bodies. Hellion Vivian smiled, we're just fooling around. You also know that Little Seven wants to send everything to me to eat. How do you plan to eat it? Belegaju seemed to be interested. He reached out and helped her tidy up the stray hair on her forehead. Hellion Vivian's eyes lit up. I'll cook it and eat it. You also know that the Fire Kareen cares about its image. Good idea. Belegaju curved his thin lips into a faint smile. He kissed Hellion Vivian's eyelids and said, but there's nothing to see about his naked body. Hearing this, the Fire Kareen finally heaved a sigh of relief. As long as Master spoke up for it, everything could be solved. However, it did not expect Belegaju's next sentence to be, looking at it hurts your eyes. Don't look anymore. The Fire Kareen. Is this considered saving me? Is Master really not attacking me verbally? Chapter 7:14. Hellion Vivian looked at Belegaju with clear eyes and a smile. Then I won't look. I don't want to affect the baby. Fire Cheline. Has no one ever considered my feelings? Little Seven frowned and put down the beast-binding rope in his hand. He patted over and asked sternly, Third sister-in-law, aren't you going to eat? Fire Cheline. Can you not talk about eating every time you open your mouth? I'm not eating. Little 7, go with them to the underworld to catch dead souls. After Hellion Vivian said this, she glanced at Beligaju and said, catch them and feed them to the baby. Beligaju's handsome face was still elegant. He paused for a moment while stroking Hellion Vivian's hair. Then he smiled and said, you know? It seems that this Chelene soup really needs to be stewed properly. When Fire Chelene heard its master's words, its Chelene skin trembled. Hellion Vivian muttered in his arms, when there's a problem, you take it out on others. Take it out on others? Bailey Jiu laughed lowly and reached out his hand to pinch her chin. His eyes were cold as he said, Madam, you haven't seen how I truly vent my anger. If you encounter a problem again and don't tell me, don't even mention your pair of claws, I'll smash you into pieces. Hellion Vivian felt a little guilty. I'm just afraid that you'll be hostile to the baby. When was I hostile to him? Beligaju casually glanced at Hellion Vivian's lower abdomen. He laughed and said coldly, I like him very much. Mother, he's lying. What do you mean like him very much? This sentence is too hypocritical. The bigger fetus moved very vigorously. The smaller fetus opened his eyes and glanced at him. Big brother, mother can't hear you. Did I wake you up again? The bigger fetus hugged the smaller fetus and snorted, when I get out, Imperial Mother will hear it. I will definitely beat Imperial Father up. When that time comes, you and I will go together. Let's see how he can continue to pretend. The fetus nodded and rubbed its eyes listlessly with its newly formed hands. The bigger fetus' red eyes dimmed when he saw how tired he was. Then, he kissed the smaller fetus' forehead and said, when we get out of here, Big Brother will give you all the good food. So, you have to go with Big Brother, do you understand? All right. The small fetus's voice was very weak, and there was still sticky blood in his eyes. He looked a little more alive. Only then did the older fetus smile and give all the stored spiritual energy to the younger fetus. Hellion Vivian couldn't hear the conversation between the two babies, but His Highness didn't sound like he liked it. What? Do you doubt my words? The man returned to his usual cold and indifferent appearance, with an expression that said if you dare to doubt me, I will throw you out of the window. Hellion Vivian coughed softly and began to pacify him. No, I just want to know what you and Imperial Physician Liu talked about. Hearing this, Beligaju glanced at the Fire Chelene lying on the ground. The Fire Chelene immediately puffed up its chest and looked wronged. It really didn't say anything. It just didn't know how the Princess Consort guessed it. I just taught him how to speak, Beligaju said casually. Hellion Wei guessed that His Highness was probably going to threaten Imperial Physician Liu, so that he would have to give him a gift in the future. It was not easy for the old man to be scared by His Highness like this. What about the baby? Why did you go to the underworld to catch dead souls for him to eat? Beligaju's faint voice had a unique mockery. After a demon is formed, it needs a lot of dead souls to maintain its demonic nature, otherwise it will harm the mother. Now all the dead souls in the palace have been scared away by him. If you don't go to the underworld to find them, where can you find them? Stupid. Don't always worry about that little brat in the future. He is very strong, but he is so stupid. You said you were not hostile, but you even used a mocking tone. Hellion Vivian understood and felt relieved. She reached out and touched her belly. He won't harm me. Beligaju said slowly, that's the best. Although his appearance was very noble, it made people feel that he was very proud. Hellion Vivian reached out and hugged him. She buried herself in Beligaju's arms and smiled, even if the baby is born, I will still like you the most. His Highness's movements suddenly stiffened. He didn't speak, but the corners of his mouth faintly curved up. His slender fingers arched and pointed at Hellion Wei's forehead. You, this person, can only redeem yourself by having good eyesight. Before Hellion Vivian had time to speak, there was a familiar coolness on her lips, with a fascinating sandalwood fragrance and a smile that melted the ice. It was very beautiful, as if there was sunlight shining on the man's pale lips. She couldn't look away at all. It was incredible. It turned out that her words could make him so happy. Beligaju reached out and hugged the stunned person. The smile on his face didn't disappear. He finally found something more interesting than killing souls, which was to hear this little thing say that she liked him. Well, although she was very stupid, sometimes she would look at him in a daze. But at least she was raised by him. How could he not take good care of her? Fire Cheline looked at this scene and was a little scared. He had never seen such a gentle master. It was as if he could give up everything just to make one person belong to him forever. Such a master was too dangerous. Because once that person disappeared, then this world. Fire Cheline shook his head and didn't continue to think about it. But his eyes darkened. Just as he was about to stand up, he found that he was dragged forward again. Tunchin, what are you doing? Was he addicted to dragging them? The little guy didn't even turn his head. To the underworld, I need you to open the door. Azure Dragon, Fire Cheline. How did they look like keys? When they arrived at the underworld, Azure Dragon and Fire Cheline found out how the little guy opened the door. He lifted them up and slammed them against the door, knocking the judge out. The judge was still holding a brush in his hand. When he saw them, his teeth trembled. Lord Fire Cheline, Lord Azure Dragon, may I know the reason why the two of you are here? As the judge spoke, he tiptoed and looked behind them. After looking for a long time, he didn't see that otherworldly figure. Only then did he slowly heave a sigh of relief. So the great demon didn't come. What a fright! Is your king of hell here? This sentence was asked by Little Seven. The judge shook his head and replied respectfully, he has gone to the human world. This should be able to avoid a fierce battle. As long as Lord wasn't here, they had no reason to fight. However, Lord seemed to have been injected with a dog vaccine recently. He would go to the human world every day to look for the great demon. But every time, he would return without success. The great demon must have hidden his aura. When Little Seven heard that the king of hell wasn't here, his eyes turned. Do it. The judge was stunned. Chapter 7:15. Our master isn't here and we still want to fight. Little Seven said righteously, we want to take advantage of the fact that the great king of hell isn't here. If he was, we would have launched a sneak attack. The judges. Can you not be so shameless and brazen? Green Dragon and Fire Cheline felt that bringing Tunchin along was a wise decision. As the saying goes, one is marked by the company one keeps. Tunchin looked quite silly, but in reality, he had long been spoiled by his master. Even his style of doing things was the same as his master's. Too sinister. To them, capturing dead spirits was nothing. The three ancient creatures just had to stretch out their hands and swipe their claws to capture a large number of dead spirits. The most difficult one to deal with was the little king of hell, who lived in the hall of life and death. He was a master with sinister means. No one could understand his character. If he was unhappy, he would be even more difficult to deal with than the great king of hell. When their master fought with the great king of hell, Green Dragon and Fire Cheline worked together but still couldn't win against the little king of hell. The main thing was that the child didn't want to live. Relying on the fact that he couldn't die, he mobilized all the dead spirits in the underworld. Fire Cheline still couldn't forget that cold smile on his face. Tunchin, you go in. Fire Cheline said to the little one. The little one shook his head. Third sister-in-law already told me not to fight. The judges who were beaten up by him, then who beat them up just now? Green Dragon frowned. Cheline, let's go in together. Let Tunchin take the dead spirits and leave first. Leave. The little king of hell walked out from the darkness. He was wearing a large black robe. When he smiled, one could see his canine teeth. Your master isn't here and you barged in alone. Do you really think I'll let you go? Fire Cheline saw his appearance and felt bad. The evil aura emitted from his body made the dead spirits around him want to die. However, why are your hands tied? Fire Cheline's eyes were still very good. The little king of hell laughed viciously. None of your business. I'm in a bad mood today, and you're here to die. I hate people like you who can wander around the human world as you please. At this time, the old judge rushed over from the side and hugged the little king of hell. Little lord, why did you run out? Hurry up and hide. They want to catch you and bring you to the human world. Are they here to capture me? The little king of hell's eyes suddenly lit up. Capture me and bring me to the human world. The old infernal judge nodded solemnly. That's why it's best for you to hide, little ancestor. If his lordship finds out that you've been kidnapped, he's going to flip hell upside down. Why didn't you say so earlier? The little king of hell smiled as he walked towards the azure dragon and the fire Cheline. He extended his hands in a friendly manner and spoke with great emotion. Hurry up, tie me up again. I don't mind sacrificing myself for the sake of hell. The azure dragon and the fire Cheline looked at each other. They had been gesturing for a long time, but the other party had stopped just like that. Moreover, the little king of hell didn't use them to tie him up at all. He directly stretched his neck and drilled into the rope they brought. He even tied a knot with both hands and said with a smile, "All right, don't always fight and kill. Be civilized." This was the first time they had seen such a cooperative kidnapper. The fire Cheline and the azure dragon were completely shocked. The old judge was stunned for a moment. Suddenly, he thought of something and was extremely angry. "Little lord, come back here. You can't go to the human world. His lordship said that he wants you to face the wall and reflect on your mistakes. Didn't you already promise his lordship? You only wrote one word in your reflection letter. There are still 1,000 words after that. What are you going to do?" "I don't want to go either. Isn't this someone who wants to kidnap me? Go back and tell my father that I gave myself to the enemy for the sake of the underworld. Tell him not to save me. I will have a good life in the human world." The little king of hell shrugged, then turned his head and said to the azure dragon and the fire Cheline, "Let's go quickly." The old judge really wanted to roar, "Kidnap my ass, it was clearly you who wanted to go." However, he couldn't lose the underworld's face in front of the enemy. Moreover, to be honest, if the little lord wasn't there, they wouldn't have any way to deal with the ancient divine beast. Although the azure dragon and the fire Cheline didn't know why the little king of hell was so cooperative, this kind of good thing didn't happen often. They immediately held the little king of hell's arm and called for the sky-devouring beast to rush out of the underworld's gate. As soon as the little king of hell arrived in the human world, he immediately took out his small mirror and looked left and right. "Wait a minute, I can't go see Little Hook like this. I must be handsome. Ari, why didn't Little Hook agree to marry me? I am already so handsome." The azure dragon and the fire Cheline felt a headache for this kind of person who praised himself so enthusiastically. However, very soon, the little king of hell sensed that something was wrong. Looking at the palace maids who passed by in front of him, his beautiful eyes narrowed dangerously. What is going on? It's the ancient times again. His little hook didn't exist in the ancient times. Put him down. A cold and magnetic voice slowly sounded behind the little king of hell. The king of hell's son paused for a moment. How could he forget that this group of ancient mythical beasts followed the great devil? They would definitely listen to the great devil's orders, and the great devil would only appear in ancient times. Unable to see his sweetheart, the little king of hell's face, which was as handsome as a porcelain doll, immediately became depressed. "Why are you looking for me? Why doesn't the underworld have her book of life and death?" The Belegaju met the little king of hell alone. When he said this, his eyes were cold as he scanned the little king of hell's face inch by inch. The little king of hell smiled, his eyes filled with craftiness. "You saw through me. I thought you didn't see through me at that time. Actually, it's nothing much. You are a demon, so you should know that only a variable cannot be included in the underworld's jurisdiction. For example, a variable like you, from a god to a demon." "God?" The azure dragon and the fire Cheline were both stunned. "God? Master is a god?" Deep astonishment flashed across their eyes. They never knew that their master was a god. It seemed that even their master didn't know that he was once a god. Otherwise, why had they never heard him mention it? When a god fell from the sky, under normal circumstances, their god bones would be scraped and their god body would be ground down. Even their memories would be lost. After falling from the sky, very few people survived. But their master, when they saw their master had a thick demonic nature. They couldn't tell that he was once a god at all. Belegaju indeed didn't have any memories of being a god, but the Sanskrit of slaying demons and the chaos of the 9 heavens still remained in his mind. I'm not interested in the past. You just need to tell me, what exactly is Hellion Vivian? Bellegaju's eyes were very faint, flashing with flowing gold. The little king of hell knew that it was a sign of demonization, but he really didn't know Hellion Vivian's true identity. I think it's a Buddhist bone. Her technique is more powerful than a Buddhist bone. Bellegaju's voice was very faint. The little king of hell shrugged. I only know that in her past life, she was the exorcist that you always avoid. Chapter 7:16. Bellegaju looked at the little king of hell as if he was looking at a joke. He said disapprovingly, in my previous life, we never even met. That's why I said you always avoid her. The little king of hell had a mysterious smile in his eyes. You clearly live on the same continent, and even live on the same mountain, but you never met her. If you're not avoiding her, then what are you doing? Bellegaju looked back at him, and even his voice was steady. I don't avoid anyone, but what you said is really strange. We live on the same mountain, but we've never met. Are you sure it's not her who's avoiding me? The little king of hell was stunned by Bellegaju's question. He frowned. It had been such a long time, and he didn't know what was going on at that time. If Hellion Vivian hadn't shown her Dharma that day, he wouldn't have thought about who she was in her previous life. Now that he thought about it, it was really strange at that time. That woman had a Buddhist nature from the moment she appeared, and she didn't fear any demons or ghosts. When she came in contact with the messengers, she had also heard of the great demon king's name, but she never once looked for trouble with him. Could it be that she was afraid of the great demon king? But it didn't seem like it. The little king of hell paused, and suddenly his eyes lit up as if he thought of something. No, you've met each other before, at least twice. It's just that you don't know. Once, after you fought with my father, you tied him to a tree with a beast-binding rope. When you walked forward, she stood behind you and looked at your back for a long time. I was still young at that time, and I was very curious about you adults. When I asked her what she was looking at, she said she was looking at a beauty. It didn't feel like she was avoiding you, but like you already knew each other. I say, Great Demon King, you didn't abandon her, did you? Bellegaju looked at him and said indifferently, no. I can prove that. Master only eats souls and doesn't get emotional. The fire Cheline jumped out to testify. The little king of hell smiled again, with a hint of evil in his voice. You only followed him after he fell from the sky. Do you know what happened before he fell? The fire Cheline was stunned by little king of hell's words. It really didn't know what its master was like before he fell from the sky. Whether it was him or Azure Dragon swallowing sky, when they met the master, he had already become the most elegant and evil representative. At that time, the whole Taibai mountain was talking about the man who came out of the darkness. No one knew how he became a demon, but they were amazed by the sinful and godlike nobility that flowed from his body. This was also the reason why they were domesticated. In other words, it was very possible that Master had abandoned Princess Consort. Thinking of this, the fire Cheline suddenly turned its head to look at Bellegaju. Bailey Jiaoju's eyebrows furrowed as well, followed by an evil smile that was not a smile. Good story. I'm telling the truth. The little king of hell spread his hands. It's up to you to believe it or not. Bellegaju looked at him, and his deep eyes sank. It was unknown what he was thinking, but it was obvious that he was a little absent-minded. Usually, after reincarnation, you won't have the memory of your previous life, but you also know that the fate of Buddha in your body won't disappear. The little king of hell smiled again. Of course, this is only known to us who often come into contact with the Book of Life and Death. What makes me curious is that you really didn't know her at that time. Then why did she look at you with that kind of gaze? Or it could be said that you originally knew her, but you lost your memory before you fell from the sky, so you forgot about her. Hearing this, Bellegaju turned his gaze. He didn't know why, but there was an inexplicable pain in his heart. That kind of pain was so obvious that he had to reach out and press his chest to relieve that untraceable trace. It was as if the sound of Sanskrit rang in his ears again, asking him if he regretted it. He could even hear his own indifferent and cold voice, "Get out of my way." There was also someone who kept saying in front of him, "She will forget you," and won't even remember anything about you. Moreover, you know better than anyone that the person she likes is not you. Those words were like a curse, making him experience what betrayal was the first time he woke up. Belegaju moved his hand away from his chest, and slowly opened his eyes. His gloved hand slowly clenched. His memory was still fuzzy. However, so what if the person she likes is not me? The person who will get her will only be me. Belegaju stood up, and his face had returned to its diamond-like indifference. When Hellion Vivian was not around, he always looked like this, as if he was a cloud in the sky that no one could touch. Of course, the little king of hell knew when to stop. Seeing the great demon like this, he asked, "You sent people to the underworld to catch dead spirits. Is there a new demon that is going to be born in the human world?" Belegaju did not deny it. The little king of hell was smart enough to know that his guess was not far from the truth. His eyes darkened, and he said, "If it is that woman who is pregnant, I advise you to let her find a way to get rid of it. You know what the situation is now. Once the newly formed little demon absorbs too much resentment, it will absorb too much nutrition from its mother." Hellion Vivian was not able to hold on until now because of the Buddha bone spiritual chi in her body. If she was an ordinary person, she would have died long ago. Moreover, there is a problem with the order of the human world. I don't know what is going on with the exorcist tribe. They want to enter the tomb and take out the sarira left behind by the senior monk, so that the dead can be completely resurrected. Once this is successful, the resentment in the human world will rush to the underworld. At that time, the divine exorcism seal will be destroyed, and the protection on her body will disappear. Your little demon will also lose all of its rationality. So as long as we stop them from getting the sarira, we can stop this from happening, right? A clear voice sounded from the side of the door. The king of hell's son turned around and looked in the direction of the voice. He smiled and said, "Since the main character is here, it will be easier to handle." That's right, once someone completely breaks the order of the cycle of life and death, it will form the heavenly ghost curse. Those who are supposed to be reincarnated will not be able to be reincarnated, and the dead will be resurrected instead. If the injustice is not appeased, the resentment will break through the seal. The thing in your stomach is not to be trifled with. Once it has absorbed enough resentment, it won't be able to recognize its own parents. Not only will it kill everyone it sees, it will also suck you dry. The union between a human and a devil is against the natural order, not to mention that you have the Buddha bone. Although this is an endless source of nutrients for the devil, it will never allow the bloodline to improve. This is fate. Chapter 717. Pitiful. Hellion Vivian smiled and walked in from outside. She was still wearing a fur coat. It seemed like she didn't hear much. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been so focused on the baby. She glanced at the little king of hell and said in a lazy voice, "Are you talking about yourself? Not only did you fall in love with a boy, but you were also rejected. Let me think about it. That person is called Little Hook, right? Was he the one who asked people to bring you back to the underworld? That's what the saying goes. Who do you think is more pitiful?" The king of hell's son was stung by Hellion Wei's words. He squinted his amber eyes and smiled again. "Don't provoke me, who knows what will happen in the future? But your spiritual aura seems to be almost depleted. What the devil can't see is that we, the people in charge of the Book of Life and Death, can see that you were protected by the Buddha's bone when you entered the world. Now that the fetus has absorbed your spiritual aura, when you can no longer give it anything, the backlash will begin. I'm only telling you this because I like you. Ask your man to visit the netherworld more often in the future. It's best if he can go in person, then my father will value him more and I will have the opportunity to avoid his eyes and go where I want to go. As for you, you shouldn't be here, right? Oh yeah, the Exorcist tribe has organized a competition, but some of them are worried that someone will cause trouble. Unfortunately, there are too few rational people, while the irrational ones are too powerful. When the time comes to enter the graveyard, we'll see who wins and the winner will get the sarira. The sarira is a great supplement for you, you'll be nourished with it. Look at you now, do you have the ability to obtain this sarira? I wasn't kicked away by Little Hook. It's not that he doesn't like me, he's just shy. When I left, he cried. What do you adults know? That was the most beautiful love between us. Even if Little Hook doesn't like me as a person, he'll fall for my face. What's the point of being so handsome for nothing? After saying that, he chopped down the towering tree in front of him with an axe. The reapers heard the news and came over, trembling with fear. A wave of yin qi surrounded them. Little Master, we have finally found you. Return to hell. The little king of hell laughed coldly and said viciously, this time, whoever tries to stop me from finding Little Hook, I'll throw them into purgatory and burn them. The reapers were expressionless, but their pale faces turned even paler. Hellion Vivian retracted her gaze from the door and looked at Beligaju. She smiled and held his hand. Then, she leaned forward and kissed his face. Let's go find the exorcising tribe. The coldness in Beligaju's eyes was gradually melted by the kiss. How could this person not like her? The group of old men in the sky were all lying. How could they expect him to believe them? A bunch of idiots. Beligaju snorted coldly in his heart. He directly hugged her and kissed her passionately. That kind of force made Hellion Weiwei unable to stand on her heels. She simply laid on top of him. Millimeter, enough. Say that you like me. Bailey Jiaju nibbled on her ear, his eyes dark. Hellion Vivian frowned. Although it didn't hurt, a certain highness was too abnormal. She laughed and kissed him with a comforting tone. I like you. The stuffiness in his chest was finally relieved. Beligaju was once again sure that the group of old men in the sky were all lying. They didn't know that this little thing looked at him with a gentle and firm gaze. Her claws were very obedient. She was simply asking him to kiss her all the time. The man laughed. He reached out and lifted Hellion Vivian's bangs that were covering her forehead. He kissed her again and said in a very low voice, Don't ever leave me. Of course. Hellion Vivian replied quickly. As a mercenary tycoon, she had to give her other half a sense of security when he didn't. This was a necessary skill. Beligaju looked at the little thing with bright eyes in his arms. He hugged her again and slowly added, Besides, no one else will want you except me. Hellion Vivian. Did he have to attack her all the time? Wait a minute, shouldn't she be the one comforting him? Why did it sound like he was comforting her in the end? We're leaving for the tomb tomorrow. The man's deep and steady voice sounded from the top of her head again. It was very sexy and pleasant to the ears. Don't run around when the time comes, okay? Millimeter, 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 I know. Hellion Vivian responded lazily. She muttered in her heart, Aren't we going together? Where can I run to? Beligaju hugged her a little closer. It seemed that this was the only way to eliminate the uneasiness that the little king of hell's words brought to him. Outside the palace, the night fell. The two in Hellion Vivian's stomach fell into a long silence. After some time, the smaller fetus moved his hand. Brother, don't give me spiritual energy anymore. That way, mother's burden will be less. The bigger fetus didn't say anything. His red eyes were like flowing blood. He was so quiet that he didn't seem like his usual self. Brother. The smaller fetus strenuously reached out and hugged him. His voice was calm. It's okay. Like you said, with father here, everything can be solved. The bigger fetus moved and finally spoke again, but his voice was a little muffled. You should have heard what that person said just now, right? From the beginning, what I ate was resentment, and what you need is spirit energy. It's obvious that I'm the one who's broken. When resentment rises, I'll lose all rationality and attack mother. Brother, you're not the one who's broken. Although the smaller fetus was very weak, his voice was very firm. Brother said that you'll take me out with you. You even said that you'll play with me. Without you, I'll be bullied, so don't think too much. We'll definitely go out together. The bigger fetus's eyes darkened. He leaned his forehead against the smaller fetus and said coldly, If anyone dares to bully you, I'll suck them dry. Okay. The smaller fetus was silent. Then, he moved his small hands and released all the spiritual energy that he had absorbed earlier. Using this method, he began to eliminate the yin energy from the bigger fetus. The efficiency of the imperial palace had always been very high, especially the Jocheong Hall. Logically speaking, it was not suitable for Beligaju to go out at this time. The ministers wanted him to ascend the throne as soon as possible, so they prepared a lot of memorials. Hellion Vivian originally thought that it would take at least a few days for them to leave. After all, those old ministers would definitely stop them. Unexpectedly, one of the ministers said, "In order to prevent the exorcism seal from being destroyed, we must obtain the Saria. I'm the most suitable person for this matter." Not only did those ministers not suspect Hellion Vivian, they were so touched that they were stunned. They praised the royal family for being wise. Chapter 718. Mount Tai Bai had the most secretive mountain range. It was surrounded by fog all year round, and the sun could not be seen. The sky outside the mountain was very dark. Dark clouds surged irregularly, and the towering trees made the road extremely gloomy. No coachman dared to come to this place. When the carriage ran on the narrow road, the stones on the side of the road would often roll down and fall into the bottomless cliff. Moreover, when the townspeople heard the words mausoleum, they would tremble and turn pale with yearning. It was not that they were unwilling to go, but they did not have the guts to go. If they did not have the art of exorcism, no one would dare to go to this place. Unless they were tired of living and wanted to die. It was rumored that there was a demon on the road to the mausoleum. Therefore, even during the day, the hunters did not dare to go near it. However, on the mountainside of Mount Tai Bai lived the best of the exorcists. They were the real exorcists. The exorcist tribe is divided into 4 major factions. Each faction has a family power. Among them, the Ni family is the most prominent, not only because their art of exorcism is the most powerful among the 4 families, but also because they do business in addition to exorcism. They have formed a perfect exorcism production chain. Hellion Vivian looked at the letter in her hand and narrowed her eyes. The Ni family? Ni Feng? What a coincidence. Hellion Vivian thought about what the little king of hell said. The exorcist guardians wanted the relics of the eminent monks so that they could completely resurrect the dead. The Ni family was also the one who suddenly proposed to take out the relics. Hellion Vivian had a hunch that since that incident, Ni Feng had already returned. However, she did not have a suitable physical body, so she needed the relics to perform the art of resurrection. However, anyone who had been in contact with exorcism knew that the art of resurrection was a forbidden technique. Once it was used, it would destroy the natural order of the world, causing the living to die and the dead to come back to life. When there were complaints everywhere, the human world would become a purgatory. If the relics were gone, there would be less spiritual energy. However, once the art of resurrection was used, those ordinary people who did not have spiritual energy to come back to life would become the living dead. Ni Feng clearly knew this, but she still set up a trap to get the Saria. It seemed that protecting the righteous path in the human world was just an empty promise. Hellion Vivian was deep in thought as she lowered her head, preparing to analyze the interests and relationships between the various families. They couldn't just participate in the competition like this. They had to infiltrate one of the clans. Excluding the Ni family, there were still 3 other families. Which one would be the most suitable and convenient for them to enter? These were all things that had to be considered. Eat something first. Someone will take care of these things. His Highness reached out his fair and slender finger and pointed at the 2 words Juga. Then, he fed her a piece of cake, his tone very indifferent. Hellion Vivian knew that this was what His Highness was best at. Thinking of the words that His Highness used when they first left the palace, she knew that this person was very good at winning people's hearts. As for disguises, it was very suitable to leave it to him. Just as he was thinking, the carriage suddenly stopped. An Ying's voice came from outside the carriage. "Master, there's a competition going on outside. The carriage can't pass through." "What kind of competition is it? Even the carriage can't pass through?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows in confusion. After all, from the information she received, there would not be any competition in the Exorcist city in the short term except for the competition to enter the tomb 3 days later. What was going on with this competition? Let's go down and take a look. As soon as Hellion Vivian got off the carriage, she felt the surge of spiritual energy in the surroundings. This kind of spiritual energy was different from the one in the palace. It was so abundant that even breathing felt a bit of pressure. This was indeed the legendary Exorcist city. The noise was getting louder and louder, and the people had also gathered in a circle. As soon as Hellion Vivian got off the carriage, she heard the people beside her snorting. This time, the Juga family's face is going to be swollen. This kind of thing is really hard to say. If the Juga family didn't pick a fight first and insist that the Ni family had ulterior motives for entering the tomb with ulterior motives, the Ni family wouldn't be so angry. They obviously don't have the strength, but they still don't know what's good for them. Now look at it, the Ni family only sent a few apprentices to force the Juga family to this point. In my opinion, if this goes on, the Juga family doesn't even need to participate in the competition to enter the tomb 3 days later. They are really weak to a certain extent. To think that they are the authentic exorcist tribe. I think even an ordinary exorcist is better than them. A steady stream of discussions could be heard. The young man standing in the middle gritted his teeth. Ni, if you have any problems, come at me. Don't bully others. Zhuge-yun, look carefully. When did we bully others? It's obvious that you trash are not good enough. Didn't you want to be beaten up? All right, brothers, follow young Master Zhuge's instructions and beat him up. The person called Ni who did not make a move from the beginning to the end. He just stood there arrogantly in his white exorcist robe with a smile on his face. They already had the advantage in numbers, and coupled with the fact that the other party couldn't withstand a single blow, it was even more obvious that he was insufferably arrogant. If it was one-on-one, Zhuge-yun might have been able to win. After all, Zhuge-yun's talent was not low, and he was considered one of the best among his peers. However, the situation today was very obvious. It was obvious that Ni who was bullying him with numbers. Everyone who lived in the Exorcist city knew that the Zhuge family used to have the most powerful exorcist in the Exorcist city. However, just 5 years ago, Zhuge-yun's father was killed for unknown reasons, and even his soul could not be found. Since then, the Zhuge family had lost its backbone. No matter how talented Zhuge-yun was, he could not win against the older generation of exorcists. Gradually, he learned to swallow his pride when he encountered problems. However, no one knew what was wrong with him this time. He said that the Saria could not be touched, and openly provoked the Ni family. How could the Ni family let him go? The older generation would not bully him, but it did not mean that his peers would not seek revenge. Ni who looked at Zhuge-yun who was beaten to the ground and walked over like a boss. He laughed at him disdainfully. Why is the eldest young master so weak? Where's your fearless spirit just now? Heh, you really don't know what's good for you. You refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Zhuge-yun did not speak. Everyone knew that he should be unable to speak now. Being beaten by 5 people in the middle, there was definitely not a single part of his body that was unharmed. However, Ni who seemed to have not vented his anger. He lifted his foot and stomped on Zhuge-yun's right hand. Chapter 719. The crowd gasped. They could almost imagine Zhuge-yun's broken hand. They could not help but sigh regretfully. Everyone knew that as an exorcist, the right hand was the most important. If Zhuge-yun's right hand was broken, it would mean that he would never be able to exorcise demons again in this lifetime. Zhuge-yun was the only pure-blooded member of the Zhuge family. There were still others, but they were only a few years old. If Zhuge-yun died here, the Zhuge family would be finished. But even so, no one dared to interfere in this matter. The Ni family was the oldest family in the entire Exorcist city. Not to mention the young master of the Ni family, Ni who was used to being arrogant and domineering, he was simply a person who did not know how to control his strength. Whoever interfered with his affairs was courting death. However, no one had expected this to happen at this very moment. The leg that was supposed to be stepping on Zhuge-yun's hand was pierced by a flying silver knife, nailing Ni who to the ground. Ni whose face was pale with fright. He looked to the side fiercely. Who threw this knife? If you have the guts, stand out for me. Zhuge Yun was also looking around. Blood was flowing from his forehead to his eyes. He was afraid that the Zhuge family was interfering in this matter and he would be implicated. What? Young Master Ni, do you want to fight one-on-one? A voice that sounded like the sound of nature came from the top of Zhuge Yun's head lazily. He did not know what happened, but his panicked heart miraculously calmed down. He rubbed his eyes with his hand and looked at the noisy crowd. Hearing that voice, he knew that it was not from the Zhuge family. But Zhuge Yun could not think of anyone who would dare to interfere in Ni's affairs at this time. No matter who this person was, he could not involve him. Thinking of this, Zhuge Yun's head started to feel dizzy. The crowd gradually made a path, and two people stood at the end of the path. Even if they were standing on the noisy street, they would be recognized immediately. It was no wonder that people automatically made way for them. Clean and perfect facial features were set off by the light. One of the shorter people strolled over, her left hand twirling the silver knife in her palm. There was a faint smile at the corner of her mouth. It was obvious that she was the one who spoke just now. Behind her was a godlike existence. His indifferent expression and eyes could almost make everyone involuntarily look at him. As the fur cloak fluttered, the two people had already arrived in front of Zhuge Yun. Shadow, help young Master Zhuge up, Hellion Vivian said with a smile, as if Ni who did not exist in front of her. Ni who was used to being overbearing in Exorcist City. Now that he saw someone who dared to go against him so openly, he looked at Hellion Vivian, his eyes were filled with murderous intent. Do you know who I am? How dare you stab me with a knife? It's none of your business. Fine, didn't you want it? Leave me one of your hands first. As Ni who spoke, he wanted to reach out and pull Hellion Vivian's clothes. What he did not expect was that before he could touch her, an indescribable pain came from his fingertips. When he looked up again, there was a man in front of him. There was a man in front of him. That man was looking at him condescendingly. His deep and narrow eyes seemed to be glowing. He didn't move, but his fingers stiffened. Then, it was his knees. The piercing pain made him scream on the spot. When the people behind him saw their young master in such a state, they all rushed over. Only a loud bang was heard. Everyone flew backward and fell heavily on the ground. Ni who had also reached his limit. His legs went soft, and his forehead was full of cold sweat. Everyone watched this scene with their mouths wide open. Even Zhuge Yun's eyes were shaking. Everyone knew that this was not an ordinary fight. It was all done with spiritual energy and exorcism. Although he had fought Ni who before, he could barely win. However, the other party did not even move, and he was able to make Ni who kneel on the ground in pain. The disciples of the Ni family did not even have a chance to fight back. How powerful must the exorcist be to be able to do this? Only someone at the level of father could do this. Someone at the level of father. The more Zhuge Yun thought about it, the more intense the agitation in his chest became. He looked at Hellion Vivian and Beligaju with eyes full of admiration. Ni who also knew that he had met a strong opponent this time. He took a step back and pressed his hand on his leg. He glanced at the people around him, and his anger surged. He was the young master of the Ni family. When had he ever suffered such a loss? As he stepped back, he did not forget to say, "You want to help Zhuge Yun, right? Good, very good. Just you wait. See how I'll deal with you next." Beligaju, who was standing in front of him, did not take his words to heart. He only stretched out his hand and adjusted his sleeves elegantly. This was what made Ni who the most angry. Who the hell dared to put on airs in front of him? Who are those two people? Ni who dragged a disciple behind him over. The disciple was already in a panic and shook his head. "No, I don't know. Trash." Ni who kicked him aside. He had never been in such a sorry state before. He had to get back at them today. Some disciples who were good at reading people's expressions went up and said, "Young master, I don't think those two people are from the Zhuge family. Could they have invited them from outside? The competition this time is about the possession of the Saria." Zhuge Yun was tough when he spoke, but in reality, who doesn't know what the Zhuge family is like? The Zhuge family has no one, so they could only find 2 laymen to fill the gap. Laymen? Another disciple murmured with a pale face, it's impossible for laymen to beat us to the point where we can't even fight back. When Ni heard this, the anger in his heart rose again, and his tone became much colder. Some people only know how to use brute force, but a real exorcist might not be that strong. Furthermore, one of them is just an ordinary person without any spiritual energy. It's more appropriate to say that he's an amateur. If Zhuge Yun wants to rely on these 2 to win the competition, then he's simply dreaming. Does he really think that anyone can enter the tomb? Idiot. Young master is right. It's not that easy to enter the tomb. With just those 2 and Zhuge Yun, I'm afraid they won't even be able to find the tomb entrance and will die on the way. This time, it was Miss who proposed to enter the tomb. The 2 of them are nothing in front of Miss. Don't you know who Miss is? She's the reincarnation of the real Phoenix girl. Be it in the past or now, she's the most powerful exorcist in the exorcising tribe. With Miss around, it's useless no matter who comes. Chapter 720. Ni, whose bruised face was filled with disdain as he listened to the words of the people beside him. He seemed to have thought of something as his eyes overflowed with malice. How can they be compared to Big Sister? Zhuge Yun, that damn idiot, how dare he look for trouble with the Ni family? Since they want to die, I'll fulfill their wish. It's time for the rules of the competition to be announced. I'd like to see how the Zhuge family will respond to the challenge. When the day comes, we'll kill Zhuge Yun first before dealing with the other 2. Yes. The disciples cupped their fists and lowered their eyes. They were all waiting to vent their anger. After this incident, the grudge between the Ni family and the Zhuge family was completely formed. Zhuge Yun knew that Ni, who was never a person who would give up easily. He looked at his benefactor standing in front of him and said in pain, "Thank you for your help. I've just ordered the servants to prepare the carriage to send you out of the city immediately. The competition has not started yet, so my identity can still be of some use. When the Ni family makes the decision, I won't be able to protect you." Shadow frowned as he listened. The masters did not enter the city to leave immediately. Young Master Yun. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly, "I know what you're worried about. The Ni family is powerful and you're afraid that Ni who will find trouble with us because of what happened today. However, young Master Yun, have you ever thought that if we were afraid of trouble, we wouldn't have helped?" Hellion Vivian's tone was very indifferent when she said the last sentence, as if she did not care about Ni who at all. Zhuge Yun was not sure about the other party's identity, but after hearing what she said, he could not help but feel a little excited. After so many years in the Exorcist City, there were very few people who dared to do so. "If that's the case, if you don't mind, you can stay in my Zhuge manor. This way, Ni who won't do anything behind our backs." When Zhuge Yun said this, his face turned pale from coughing. It was obvious that he was badly injured. Hellion Vivian knew that it was not easy for a young man to achieve this, but it was undeniable that the Zhuge family was much worse than the Ni family. The pillar of the family was gone, and Zhuge Yun was still young when he was the head of the family. It was inevitable that this would happen. Before Hellion Vivian and the rest could enter the main room, someone rushed out from inside. It was a madam in her 40s. She was dressed plainly, but there was an indescribable aura around her. She looked at Zhuge Yun anxiously and asked, "Yun, are you okay?" "Mother, don't worry. I'm just slightly injured." As he spoke, Zhuge Yun turned to Madame Zhuge and said, "It's all thanks to the help of these 2 brothers. If it weren't for them, Ni Hu and his group wouldn't have been chased away." With tears in her eyes, Madame Zhuge looked at Hellion Vivian and Beligaju gratefully. She kept thanking them and asked the servants to serve some cakes and tea. "Yun, I've heard about what happened outside just now." Madame Zhuge took a white handkerchief from the servant, dipped it in the powder, and applied it to Zhuge Yun. Her eyes were full of distress as she said, "It's been hard on you. I know that you've always wanted to be a righteous exorcist and carry on your father's last wish. The burden of the Zhuge family is on you. I knew that you would offend the Ni family if you raised an objection, but I still asked you to do it. Zhuge Yun shook his head and interrupted Madame Zhuge. Mother, I did it willingly. This time, the Ni family wants the Saria. It's obvious that they have evil intentions. Back then, the ancestor had instructed that no one is allowed to use the art of reverse manipulation. Once the people in the exorcist city change, the positive spiritual energy that suppresses the mausoleum in Mount Taibai will disappear. At that time, not only will the exorcist city face a great calamity, even the divine exorcism seal that was set back then will be destroyed. Over the years, the Ni family's influence has been too great. The exorcist city is not controlled by any country in the divine mainland. That's why so many people believe in the Ni family. If we don't stop them now, it will be too late. I'm very happy that you can think this way. Since there are distinguished guests here, let's not talk about these annoying things. After you heal your wounds, ask someone to show the two young masters around the courtyard and see what they want to eat. I'll ask someone to prepare dinner. As Madame Zhuge spoke, she turned her head and smiled at Hellion Vivian. How should I address the two young masters? Hellion Vivian was wearing men's clothes, but with her observation, it was impossible that Madame Zhuge did not see through her real identity. Otherwise, she would not have changed the servant serving her to a maidservant. That maidservant even poured her a cup of red date tea, which was prepared only when women were present. It was specially prepared for women to warm their bodies. As generous as Madame Zhuge was, she would not make such a low-level mistake. Therefore, it was obvious that Madame Zhuge already knew that she was a woman, but she did not expose her. Instead, she just got along with her naturally, which was very comfortable. However, it was not convenient to tell the people of the exorcist city her and Beligaju's names, so Hellion Vivian took out the name she used before, Wei Wei. Madame Zhuge still wanted to ask more questions, but at this moment, the servant outside suddenly ran in, panting as if something big had happened outside. Chapter 721. When Zhuge Yun saw the servant's anxious look, he thought that Ni who was angry and brought people to get back at him. Ignoring his injuries, he immediately picked up the exorcist sword beside him and said to Madame Zhuge, Mother, I'll leave the matter of arranging for Brother Wei and the rest to leave the city to you. I'll go out now and hold Ni who back. Okay, Madame Zhuge responded calmly and was about to order someone to bring Hellion Vivian and Beligaju away. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly and stopped her. She said politely, Madam, this servant hasn't said what's the matter. It might not be Ni who came. Hellion Vivian had her reasons for saying that. Not everyone could withstand the beating from the royal family. Even if Ni who wanted to get back at them, he would have to heal his injuries first. Moreover, for someone like Ni who, his first reaction would be to ask for help from his family when he was in trouble. Ni who was used to being ruthless and would do whatever he wanted. The Ni family was different. Since they were wearing the mantle of upholding justice, they would naturally have to put on a show. They would not bring a large number of people to the Zhuge family to block them before the competition. If they really wanted to deal with someone, they would do it during the competition to show that they were righteous. Hellion Wei's analysis was indeed correct. The page boy, who was panting, finally found a chance to speak. He turned sideways and blocked Zhuge Yun's path. He kept panting as he said, Young master, the people from the Ni family did not come. No one came. Then why are you in such a hurry? Zhuge Yun stopped in his tracks, and even his thick eyebrows furrowed. The servant finally calmed down and said word by word, the competition rules have been released. The rules have been released. There's a problem. What's the problem? Zhuge Yun's heart sank. He suddenly grabbed the servant's arm. Anyone with a discerning eye knew that the Zhuge family could not afford any changes. If there was a problem with the competition at this juncture, the situation would be even worse. The manservant took a deep breath and said, It's not that there's a problem. It's just that entering the mausoleum is not a small matter. In order to protect everyone as much as possible, the families discussed and decided that each family should send at least 3 people to participate in the battle. They can also bring an additional manservant so that they can look after each other along the way. After several families discussed and decided, Zhuge Yun's angular face darkened with childishness. Which families made the decision? I didn't receive any news at all. The manservant didn't say anything and just lowered his head bitterly. He knew that his young master was angry. It was clearly a matter that should be discussed by several families, but he didn't inform his young master before making such a decision. It was obvious that after the previous incident, the Ni family had started to join forces with the other two families to exclude the Zhuge family. I know what's going on. Zhuge Yun's face was filled with gloom and tenacity. The manservant couldn't bear to look at his expression, so he called out softly, "Young master." "It's okay." Zhuge Yun smiled, his eyes dark as ink. "I thought that this would happen from the beginning. The Ni family's methods have always been like this. I just didn't expect it to happen so quickly, and even more so, I didn't expect them to tamper with the rules of the competition." Hellion Vivian basically understood everything when she heard this. The Ni family had started to tamper with the rules. Moreover, this was done very cleverly and quietly. Other than the heads of the four big families, no one else knew how the rules of the competition were set. Everyone in the Exorcist city thought that since it was a competition, it was fair. However, in reality, everyone knew that the Zhuge family had already fallen in the previous generation. Now, other than Zhuge Yun, the exorcism techniques of the others were simply not up to par. At least 3 people were required to participate in the battle. This was simply set up to make things difficult for the Zhuge family. In fact, even if Zhuge Yun participated alone, he would definitely lose. However, the Ni family obviously didn't want to win so easily. What they wanted was to completely suppress them. They wanted the Zhuge family to take the initiative to forfeit. Only in this way would they be able to highlight their prowess and remove the label of having ulterior motives. Madame Zhuge also thought of this, and her face immediately turned pale. The Ni family, how could they be so overboard? "Mother." Zhuge Yun supported his mother with his uninjured right hand. His clean-side profile was full of passion. "Don't worry, no matter how overboard they are, I will fight for the Zhuge family." Madame Zhuge reached out and touched the side of her son's face. "Yun, for so many years, the Zhuge family has been pressuring you. I know that you are sensible, but this time is different. This time, you won't be able to win just by working hard. I believe that if I give you another 5 years, you will definitely find a way to settle everything. But now, the Zhuge family has come to this point. The young ones are too young, and the old ones are too old. The rules of the competition stipulate that at least 3 people must participate. You are the head of the Zhuge family, so you have the obligation to take the lead and participate in the competition. But what about the others? Who would be willing to part with their children?" Speaking of this, Madame Zhuge held back the sadness in her eyes. It was enough to show how magnanimous she was. Everyone's heart is made of flesh. Everyone knows that it is not easy to enter the tomb. Not to mention getting the Sarira, I am afraid that on the way there will be people who will never return. In the Zhuge family, other than you, the rest of the people have just learned how to summon the Reapers. This kind of Dao technique is indeed very powerful if it is used to exorcise ghosts, but it is impossible to enter the tomb. "Mother." Of course, Zhuge Yun knew that every word his mother said was what he was facing now. But was he going to give up just like that? Was he going to watch the Ni family's scheme succeed? Not to mention carrying out his father's last wish, he was not even allowed to participate in the competition. The more Zhuge Yun thought about it, the redder his eyes became. Even if he was a mature teenager, his eyes overflowed with tears of unwillingness. He punched the wooden table so hard that the skin on his fist was scratched. Even his voice was a little hoarse. "I am not capable enough. If father was here, they would definitely not dare to do this. We." Speaking of this, Zhuge Yun seemed to have a sore throat. "Let's forfeit the competition." Madame Zhuge felt bad when she saw her son like this. She took a deep breath and was about to speak. At this moment, a voice as clear as water rang out beside their ears. It was neither anxious nor impatient, and even carried a slight smile as if it could pacify their hearts. "If we don't have enough people, what does young Master Yun think of us?" Chapter 722. Upon hearing this, Zhuge Yun and Madame Zhuge both paused and turned to look at Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian's lips curled up slightly. She was still holding a teacup in her hand. Despite her flustered state, she did not change her expression at all, just like a gentleman. Madame Zhuge immediately refused. Her tone was filled with gratitude and modesty. "Thank you for saving my Zhuge family time and time again. However, I can't let you participate in the competition. The Ni family is very powerful in the Exorcist City. Because of the Zhuge family, you have already gotten into trouble. Going to the tomb is different from other things. We can't let you take such a big risk." Hellion Vivian knew that Madame Zhuge was thinking for them. In order to further convince Madame Zhuge, Hellion Vivian smiled and revealed a little. "To be honest, we came to the Exorcist City this time to participate in the exorcism competition. However, we have not decided which family to join yet. Moreover, we were involved in this matter. If we did not act rashly and beat up the young master of the Ni family too harshly, the Ni family would not have retaliated to this extent. I guess someone knows that Ni who was beaten up, so they wanted to avenge the young master of the Ni family. Since we were the ones who caused this trouble, we have the obligation to settle it. Although I do not have much spiritual energy, I have exorcised demons before, so I won't cause too much trouble. As for my companion, young Master Yun, you have seen his skills, so I believe there won't be too much of a problem." Zhuge Yun did not expect that the other party would be willing to join the Zhuge clan. He had heard that the other clans were also looking for exorcists outside of their own city for the sake of the competition, in order to have a higher chance of winning. Just now, these two people had beaten Nihu and the rest to a pulp. Although he could not figure out the identity of these people, Zhuge Yun knew that they were hidden experts. He also thought that these experts came for the competition, but in his heart, he seemed to have guessed that these two people came for other families. Now that he heard that they wanted to join the Zhuge family, the first emotion that burst out was excitement. "Do the two of you really want to join the Zhuge family?" Zhuge Yun seemed to be unsure. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly and nodded. "Yes, even without today's incident, we would still join the Zhuge family as long as young Master Yun agrees." "Why?" Zhuge Yun's eyes flashed as he stubbornly looked at Hellion Vivian. He then smiled bitterly and said, "Since the two of you are here to participate in the competition, you should have done your research before coming here. In the Exorcist City, only the Ni family has the highest chance of winning. As for our Zhuge family, as you can see, we don't have anyone who can participate in the competition. It's better to choose any family than to choose our family." Hellion Vivian didn't say anything. She just turned the teacup in her hand. Beligaju, who was sitting beside her, didn't say a word from beginning to end. However, this person seemed to have a natural aura that could shake people's hearts. Even if he was just sitting there quietly and lazily supporting his chin, he could easily attract the attention of others. Especially when his deep eyes were focused, it made people feel even more pressured. Zhuge Yun explained, "The two of you don't have to think too much. I just feel that there are so many good choices. Why did the two of you choose me? Because you are more handsome." Hellion Vivian smiled. "Are you satisfied with this answer, young Master Yun?" After hearing this, Zhuge Yun's thin face turned even redder. Hellion Wei stood up at this moment. Her eyes were crystal clear as she said, "Because you're the only one who truly wants to uphold justice. Everyone knows that this is a difficult path to tread, and everyone knows about the Ni family's influence in Exorcist City. You're the only one who stood up and opposed them. What's more, the Zhuge family is not bad at all. You are just too young." As she said this, Hellion Vivian pointed at the boys who were still seriously learning Taoist magic outside the door. Her voice was faint. 10 years in the east, 10 years in the west, 10 years in the east, 10 years in the west. Sooner or later, there will be a day when you will be stronger than the Ni family, right?" Zhuge Yun had never received this kind of affirmation. Other than his mother, no one believed that he could bring the Zhuge family back to its former glory. From the time his father passed away until now, he walked through the eyes of pity and ridicule every day. He had no other choice but to grit his teeth and become stronger. His father's death was full of mystery. Or rather, He couldn't think of anyone who could deal with an exorcist like his father, who was so powerful. However, he was very clear that a few days before his father's death, he specifically told him not to let anyone use Saria to bring the dead back to life. Otherwise, the world would be in chaos, and the human world would fall into a sea of purgatory. After his father passed away, he had a taste of the human world. When people were good, they would be jealous and envious of you, and would flatter you all the time. When you were in a bad situation, everyone would step on you. He didn't know how long it had been since he heard such words. Life is full of ups and downs. Don't bully a poor young man. Zhuge Yun seemed to feel that the blood flowing in his body was boiling hot. He looked at Hellion Vivian, and before he could make a decision, Madame Zhuge said, "Okay." A simple word made Zhuge Yun's eyes turn red again. He thought that his mother would not agree. He knew that his mother had a lot to worry about, unlike him who only needed to rush forward. Madame Zhuge wiped her son's eyes and said with a smile, "As a mother, how can I not see that you don't want to give up at all? You have the ability to do so. Among the younger generation of the few families, your exorcism skills are the most outstanding. Since the two benefactors think highly of the Zhuge family, then Yuna can't disappoint them." "Yes." Zhuge Yun nodded his head heavily. Madame Zhuge turned around and bowed deeply to Hellion Vivian and the rest. Her eyes were shining brightly like never before. They were persuaded by Mother. The bigger fetus in Hellion Wei Wei's stomach heard the noise outside and moved his body. His voice was cold and a little cold. Mother's words just now made Madame Zhuge completely open her heart to her. The smaller fetus moved and said with a faint smile, "Mother has always been very smart. She is also very likable, unlike father who only knows how to threaten people." The bigger fetus hugged the smaller fetus and kissed his head expressionlessly. "You can't be like father in the future, okay?" The smaller fetus was speechless. "You are more like father." You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.